Hello and welcome everyone. It's Fast Kareem with Learnit, and today I want to start talking a little bit about Excel 2021. This class will focus on the beginner topics of Excel 2021, like the user interface, spreadsheet design, and formatting. However, in October of 2021, as we all know, Microsoft released Windows 11, and alongside it came Office 2021, where you can buy a standalone version of Office with a set of features instead of opting in for Office 365, which some organizations do because they can purchase a subscription for Microsoft. And when they get the subscription, they get updates to these softwares regularly, where Office 2021 comes out with a set of features and there's no updates after that. Now, in these sessions, we have an Excel beginner, intermediate, even expert session that we're going to cover. We have a set of topics. Now, in this course, I broke up the topics into two different what I call modules, where the first module is going to cover Excel essentials, the user interface, some basic features that we should know about, basic maneuvering, keyboard shortcuts, and some formulas, the basics of them: max, min, sum, count. In Module 2, I also want to spend some time and just start talking about formatting, how to design a spreadsheet using certain tools, how to set up a page, how to go to page print preview. Now, this class is also designed to be a little hands-on, meaning I recommend you to pause the video after I show you something, and I even say that sometimes in the video, to try, to give a practice, maybe building the formula that you just saw me see, or use the keyboard shortcut that I'm using. So with that being said, don't be shy to open up your Excel, your Office 2021, and practice these things. In this beginner course, I will be building the spreadsheet entirely from scratch. There isn't an exercise file, but we'll be building it from scratch from a blank workbook. I'm pretty excited to get started. Let's go ahead and begin. So I just launched Excel, and as soon as you launch these Office products, since 2013 in fact, you get taken to a screen that's known as the Start screen. There has been some updates here and there to it throughout the years, but it's looking like they left most of it the same, if not almost all of it the same this year in Office 2021. But let's talk a little bit about the Start screen, and on the left-hand side, you're going to notice that there's three areas you can navigate to. One being Home, the other one being New, where you can access your templates and build a new workbook, or even open an existing workbook directly from your computer. Let's talk a little bit about each one of these tabs before we move forward to a blank workbook and discover the new Office 2021 user interface. Now, when you end up clicking on Home here, it's going to show you an area where you can access your new built-in templates, or you can browse online for some pre-existing templates that Microsoft has available for you. And if you've saved any personal templates, you can also access them directly from here. I just don't have any saved yet. Now, besides actually going to Home and having this area for templates, you also have a search box to browse templates, and if you've opened any recent workbooks, you're going to see them listed here. You can also pin them to this area to keep them nicely, conveniently accessible, and you can browse the workbooks that people have shared with you through maybe OneDrive or Outlook directly from here. So the home page is a nice area to get started. And when you click on New, it just shows you the templates that we just saw on the home page. And Open, of course, is going to show you an area where you can browse your cloud services like maybe SharePoint or OneDrive, or even browse your PC to select the file or a workbook and open it, or even access your autosave workbooks. In case there's been a crash, you can recover any unsaved workbooks directly from here. Very powerful feature. So a lot to discover here in the Start screen. Not too many changes that I've seen. We still have our account where we can sign into directly from the top hand side, which I'm already signed in as. We still have the Excel options at the very bottom. We have our account information at the bottom where we can give that a click. And here we can see that I have my Office Home and Business 2021 license there. I'm not going to change the theme. I'm going to leave it as the colorful theme since we're talking about the software today, but there are quite a few different themes that we can change this software application to. Or even the backgrounds. We can have an office background, like right now I have this clouds. I can customize it and have no backgrounds, keep it nice and simple there. So, we just did a little tour of the start screen. It's useful to know about. It's a good area to get started. But now that we've done that, I just want to start talking a little bit about my favorite template, probably the one I use the most, the blank workbook. Because in this course, I want to talk about quite a few features in Excel. And how I do that is I want to build a spreadsheet that actually tracks the sales of a restaurant that I'm building. The restaurant's called Faz Food. And I'm just going to track some weekly sales, see how much I made for the month, see who sold the most food, who sold the least food, maybe hand out bonuses, depending on that. And I want to build a spreadsheet that I could eventually hopefully print and put on my bulletin board every month. Now, hopefully the spreadsheet's reusable. It has colors and it's pretty, it's formatted, so that way I can put it front facing and print it. And hopefully it all fits on one page. So we want to talk about all those features that allow us to do that using this newer interface that we have. Now, let me click on a blank workbook here and give you a tour of the Office 2021 user interface. I went ahead and launched the blank workbook. And now that I'm in a blank workbook, I just want to talk a little bit about the Office interface because there has been some changes to it. As you all know, the Windows 11 look is quite drastically different than Windows 10. It has much softer bezels, looks like a much more lighter tone, and it has an overall different experience to it. And I've noticed they kind of mimic that look with these Office products. And they actually have a newer interface for the ribbon. Kind of looks more protruded out there, as you can see, with the tabs kind of sticking out a little bit differently than they used to be. And then, of course, we're always going to have our command groups still, where we have the labelings on the bottom. We have our command groups. So there is a lot going up there with the new Office 2021 ribbon. Now, one thing I want you to notice, though, with this Office 2021 ribbon is that there's actually no quick access toolbar anymore. There used to be a set of tools that we can actually add here. This might alarm people. And don't worry, I've actually found out you can turn it back on. So if you are one of those people that are familiar with the quick access toolbar and you notice you just upgraded and you don't have it anymore, I do want you to feel free to pause the video and first watch what I do and then go add the quick access toolbar to your user interface because I do enjoy using it. Let me go ahead and right click one of these tabs so that I can customize the ribbon. And from there, I actually have an option to specifically customize the quick access toolbar. And now in Office 2021, they're actually going to ask you to, well, turn on the Show Quick Access Toolbar setting. And you can choose the position above or below the ribbon. I'm going to put mine above the ribbon and hit OK. So now I have my quick access toolbar options there where I can add them directly to the top where they used to be there. I can also right click and pin some items there from my toolbar and the ribbon in the command groups as well. So if you do enjoy using your quick access toolbar, I highly recommend to just give this video a pause and go to your ribbon and right click a tab. Just right click any tab, it doesn't matter which one it is, and customize the ribbon so that you can access the quick access toolbar settings. And on the very bottom there, you just have to check mark it on and choose if you want it above or below the ribbon and hit OK. Glad you did that. If you didn't, it's okay. Maybe one day you will. If not, maybe you like the minimalistic look. Now, I also want to mention that if you want to hide your ribbon, we have a little area there, a little drop down where we can select it. And now we have these settings for the ribbon. We can always show the ribbon. That's my preferred setting. We have a full screen mode, which hides the ribbon until you click on the top. We also have an option for show tabs in case you're on a mobile device or a little laptop. That way you have a small screen, you can save some real estate. So as you click, it shows you the tools. I'm going to always go to always show ribbon though. And I like how they conveniently left hide the quick access toolbar option and show the quick access toolbar option directly there so we can quickly add and remove those toolbars that we have. Pretty interesting. I also want to point out the bottom of our workbook, where our sheet names are, has a little bit more of a rounded bezel look instead of a square look. We can still add our sheets, and of course if you do a right click in this area, you're still going to get the activate window, which is going to be a vertical list of all the sheet names in the workbook. I'm going to take advantage of the zoom slider here. This zoom slider, and I'm going to zoom into the spreadsheet so that we can begin maneuvering around Excel. Great. Nice and zoomed into my spreadsheet here. I'm on cell A1, that's what my name box is showing me. And the cool thing about Excel is today, at any point in time, if you ever want to look for a certain feature, they also have a search box at the very top of the ribbon. This has been here for quite a few iterations now, but it's worth a mention, where you can search for certain features. And even if you need help on them, receive help on them by looking into the Microsoft support articles that open up pretty natively within the software. This is a quick little article on Power Pivot, a great tab that you can use for your pivot tables. I'll go ahead and close that there. So, not many changes to the user interface, but it does have a nice, clean, refreshed look. I want to say the biggest thing that you're going to notice is that your ribbon display options have now moved, and your quick access toolbar is now able to be turned on or off, which is something that we couldn't previously do. Go ahead and pause the video, open up a workbook, play around, take a look at your user interface, set up the settings for your quick access toolbar. I'm going to save my workbook here. I'm going to go ahead and call it the Fast Food Monthly Sales. So that we can get started. Hopefully you do the same. So now I actually want to begin by typing in these cells and creating the spreadsheet that I would like. And I'm going to do that by adding a title to my spreadsheet. I'm just going to call this one Fast Food. And I'm just going to put on the bottom there, Always Fresh. And why not, Always Faz. That's me. Now, when I hit enter here, I just want to point out for people, when you hit enter in Excel, that actually moves down something known as your cell address box, which is that green box there. And the enter key is how we navigate and essentially move it down a cell space. So I'm going to hit enter just one more time because I do want to add some headers to my spreadsheet because I want to actually track the salespeople. And I just want to do a week by week breakdown. And now that I've actually added in salesperson, I just want to mention another little shortcut that I use. Because I did move over to this cell over here. I moved basically to the right. That's what I essentially did. I moved over And in order to do that, I simply clicked on the Tab key, and that actually went ahead and moved me to the right-hand side. And now, of course, if I hold down to Shift and Tab, that's actually going to move me back to the left. Same thing with Enter. Extremely useful to navigate with shortcuts, especially when you get to more advanced topics like an Excel expert when we talk about macros. So now that I have this here, I actually want to add in a quick little column for week 1. And I notice when we are typing in spreadsheets, there are certain situations where words get cut off in the cell. And that's not a big deal. I mean, there's many ways we can fix this, but this might happen all over the place. It might happen over several different columns. We can always go to the top of each one of these columns where the letters are. That's where the column is. And between them, you can always expand them to make them bigger or smaller. However, I've always dealt with situations where I have multiple columns. Multiple columns that have that situation. Like this column and this column now. And I like to mention in my beginner courses that there's this little triangle here next to your column headers. And you give it a little click, it's going to select all the columns and all the rows in the entire sheet. And if you go ahead and do a double click in between one of the columns or one of the rows, it's going to give you a best fit for the entire spreadsheet since everything's selected for entire columns or for the entire rows. So notice how the salesperson column is nice and large simply because it takes the place of the largest cell and it fits the column to that size. Or B and C fit the cell size of week 1 and week 2. So always remember, if you need to quickly fix a spreadsheet sizing for these cells, or if you see a lot of pound signs or hash signs within cells when you have numbers, it's just letting you know that these cells are too small to display something for you. And you might want to quickly click on that triangle and do a double click on the rows or the columns, depending on what situation it is, to quickly get it fixed for you. I usually do that before I email something out or quickly before I save the workbook and close it. So the next time I open up, it's nice and clean. Now that I actually have these headers in place where I put week 1 and week 2, I want to continue on by adding in week 3 and week 4 in these cells. But in order to do that, I'm going to take advantage of a tool called AutoFill. Now, I want you all to know that every cell that you have a cell address box on has this little square, a green one, on the corner of it. That's the autofill handle. And what it's going to do is it's going to help you. If you have a word and a number, it's going to increment that number next to the word. So I can have week 4, week 5, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. I can do months, I can do days. Let me go ahead and expand this here. I'm going to make it to week 3 and I'm going to make it to week 4. Now, a lot of people are new to this when they use the autofill handle. Please make sure that when you are using it, that you're making sure to see the visual indicator that you're on top of the autofill handle by looking at the skinny black crosshair before left clicking and holding and dragging across. Looking good, looking good. So there's something I want to do here to my headers. Currently, I have my headers in, but what I want to do is I want to highlight them. I want to highlight all of these headers so that I can align them in the middle of the cell for each one of these cells. And in order to actually do that, it's a really simple process, but I want to talk about keyboard shortcuts to do things, because this is definitely where the power of efficiency comes in. In real life, you might have 50, 60, you might have a whole year's worth of data that you're highlighting, not just 4 weeks. And knowing these keyboard shortcuts will save an immense amount of time when highlighting things. So if I needed to highlight this top row from the very start here, I can always use Control-Shift, and then I can choose a directional arrow. And it will highlight in that direction until it meets a blank cell. Let me try that out. Control-Shift to the right. I like, and of course I can always go to my Home tab, and under the Alignment command group I can center these items here. Great. Now that I have this in here, what I want to do is I also want to continue by adding in the actual salespeople names. And then hopefully giving them some data, some raw data that I can put in that I have for the month. So I'm just going to add in some salespeople here. Let me go ahead and put my name as one of the salespeople. Here I'll go ahead and put some familiar names that we might have heard of, maybe not. Keep it simple. It's a small staff, super small team. We're going to keep it with only 4 of us. So now that I have this here, I want to actually start adding in some data to my spreadsheet. So when I enter in data, I'm going to put my cell address box on a cell. I'm just going to add in some data, some fake numbers like 50. I'm going to hit Tab to move over to the right so I can add in 100. And now I want to talk a little bit about another trick that we want to take advantage of. We want to get used to it. It has to do with the autofill handle again. My autofill handle. Remember that thing I just used a moment ago where I highlighted a chunk of cells or a cell and this little square was pulled? Well, what happens if you do it with 2 cells selected instead of just 1, right? That's what I have now. It's actually going to follow a pattern. So this pattern is plus 50. So in these next cells, if I actually pull my autofill handle in that direction to the right, it's going to be 150 and 200. Let me go ahead and pull that. And of course, autofill tries to help as much as possible. So if you end up pulling it down and you have too many cells selected, like it's not going to recognize a pattern here. But it will help you by copying down the cells now. I'm going to go ahead and drag down here. So it copied it. I'm going to drag down here again. And I'm going to drag down here again. So I have some fake numbers in here, just some fake sales data to get the spreadsheet template a little bit of a look. I wanted to see how it would look with numbers in it. However, this is supposed to actually display sales data. And what I want for these actual cells are for them to have a data type for the currency values that I'm displaying. And in order to do something like that, I want to actually use the keyboard shortcuts to highlight the chunk of cells, I should say. I can always use the keyboard shortcut to highlight to the right. And of course, I can always use the keyboard shortcut to highlight all the way down. Now that I have this highlighted, I have multiple routes that I can take to add this currency format. Now inside my Home tab, I actually have a number command group where I can toggle on the currency format and hide my decimal places. But I'm all about efficiency. And if you notice, there's actually keyboard shortcuts for many things that we're talking about today. And if you want, you can always use Control-Shift and the number 4 at the same time being held. Remember, the number 4 holds a $sign to change those cells that you have selected to a currency format. That's pretty convenient. If you change it to 5, it goes to percentage. Date, time is 3, 2. 1 is general. Or 1 is number. Tilde is general. I'm going to hit the Control-Shift 4 there. Rather simple. Keeps it smooth. I didn't have to move my hands anywhere. I didn't have to go away from the keyboard. Now the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to knock away these decimal places by holding down the Alt key and clicking on the letter H, because that's where the H key is. And then I'm going to click on the number 9, because that's going to hide the decimal place. And you can also do it really fast. You can hit Alt and then H and then 9 really fast, and it'll hide the decimal places. I've been talking for a while though, and I've actually produced quite a nice spreadsheet. There's not any color to it, but I have the layout down. I have the columns created and the headers in them. I have some sample data. I have all the salespeople's names on the roster. Got the title, the slogan. Things are looking good. I centered the headers, added the currency data type that I needed. Now what I would like you to do is just pause this video and catch up. If you haven't been doing so, pause the video and create this spreadsheet. Use those shortcuts. Practice the data types, adding in cells, hitting enter, hitting tab, hitting shift enter. Navigate around. Go back to the video and rewatch certain parts as you do it. But definitely practice with those shortcuts in mind. Hopefully I'll see you soon. Pause the video, give this a try, and come right back. Welcome back. Hopefully you had fun creating the spreadsheet, practicing the shortcuts. And now that we have some data, or some names actually in here, something I want to mention that we have available since Office 2016. In case you come across a word you're not familiar with, or you want to get some information, an article about something, there's a tool known as Smart Lookup, where you can always look up information using a Bing search directly from the spreadsheet. And of course, once I'm done with this search, I can close it. And it's just worth a mention when you have this cool feature known as Smart Lookup with a right click, or you can always go over to, if I'm not mistaken, the Review tab. And the Smart Lookup is available under the Insights command group. Very interesting stuff. They try to get you to stay in Excel as much as possible instead of hopping away to these various browsers that you might need to use with this feature. So now that I have this in here, I have this data in here, what I want to actually do is I want to build a column that tracks the totals for these salespeople. And in order to do that, I have to perform these simple calculations. A sum. I have to sum certain cells And there's so many ways to do that in Excel. So many different ways. And I just want to talk about these various ways that we have available since this is a beginner course. Let me build a total column here. And I just want to run through the various ways you can perform simple calculations or even build a formula to do the job. Now, the most basic way to actually add something in Excel, or to run a formula, an equation, a function, is to start your cell with an equal sign. That tells Excel, hey, I'm about to do a formula, I'm about to do a calculation. And if you want, you can actually select the cells that you want to use in the formula by selecting the cell once the equal sign is there. So instead of actually putting the numbers you want, although some people do this, putting the numbers that you want, it's much more preferred to put the cell address you want. Tell Excel where to look. That way, in case the number changes in the spreadsheet, you don't have to go running to update the total column as well. Now, of course, this way might take a little time if you have a lot of numbers to add. And it seems kind of like a repetitive process there with even 4 cells. But if I sum up B5 plus C5, D5, and E5 and hit enter, because I'll go down a cell, I'll total to 500 as it should there. On the bottom of Excel, there's something known as a status bar. If you haven't heard of it before, the bottom of that software is called the status bar, where our zoom slider is located, and it actually shows us the sum is 500. When you have cells highlighted, of course. So another way of actually doing a calculation is instead, you're still going to need an equal sign, but this time you're going to use a function from the Excel's function library. It ends up showing you all the function names once you start filtering for it and start typing in a few letters. Like I want to use the sum function, and I can filter for sum. And once I end up highlighting it, I can always click on the tab key to fill in the rest for me. And this essentially allows me to highlight a chunk of cells within a parentheses so that I can use the sum function to add up all these cells for myself without manually adding those plus signs in. Those are repetitive tasks. You know, there's even a way where you can highlight. Remember, we know shortcuts. We know the shortcut where we can highlight something with Control, Shift, and the right arrow. I'm going to do that to highlight the Michael Scott there. And if I want, I can also do this thing where I can hit Alt plus an equal sign. This is actually going to use a tool known as AutoSum. You have to hold the equal sign and the Alt key at the same time. It's called AutoSum. And when I do that, if I hit Alt and the equal key, it'll actually run a sum function for me on the row that I had selected. The issue with that is every time you do it, it's always going to show up on the cell right next to it. So if you didn't want the answer to be right next to it, that wouldn't be your way. Now, of course, I'm going to highlight this, Control Shift to the right. And one final way that I want to talk about is using something invented. In 2016, it was called the Quick Analysis tool, where we can always quickly access a set of tools that are already in our ribbon, but one of those tools is called Totals. And if I want, I can always select the sum as one of the totals there. It did make it bold for me, but that's always a quick fix by turning off the bold there. So many ways to do the same task, honestly. Performing a simple calculation or doing a formula, using a tool known as Quick Analysis. All these things are going to get the job done in add up some cells, subtract some cells, maybe multiply some cells. We'll play around with those functions coming soon, but the one basic one I wanted to start out with was sum, to just perform simple calculations across the workbook. Now, something I want to mention is I've been talking for a little bit. I've added a lot to the spreadsheet. I use OneDrive. You may be using OneDrive or another cloud service, but when you do save your Word files, Excel files, PowerPoint files on OneDrive, autosave actually turns on. I don't have to worry about saving anything because it automatically saves it for me. But I just want you to spend a moment of time, if you haven't yet, going to the File tab and saving a copy of the workbook, if you have yet to do so. Or hit the Save button you've already gave it a name, just to keep and save all the data that you've currently added. You never know when you get an unexpected crash or a power outage. So, now that we've practiced filling out a totals row, before we move on to some other, I wouldn't even call them more advanced functions, just some different functions like max, min, count, I want you to practice. I want you to practice doing a formula by putting in the actual cell addresses. I want you to practice by actually putting in a sum function. Use your keyboard shortcut to highlight things. Use AutoSum, Alt plus equal. Use quick analysis. Highlight the cells and go to the square there. When you are done practicing the totals, go ahead and come back to the video and press play, and we'll continue with some more basic calculations, formulas, or functions that we should use throughout Excel. All right. While you're away, I went ahead and added a few extra cells in the spreadsheet. Let me go ahead and highlight these two columns. I just want to add some borders around it as well. I'm going to add some borders around these cells, because I want to actually use the sales data that I have, and I want to figure out some totals, the average, the max, what's the biggest number, what's the smallest number, and how many numbers are in the data set. Let's start out with the total here. So of course we're going to use the function library in Excel, and we've already used this one quite a few times, the sum function. Always remember to click on tab, please. It saves you quite a bit of time with these longer function names that we're going to see in just a moment. And with sum here, I'm simply going to highlight this chunk of squares. Remember, we have keyboard shortcuts if there's really large, but that's going to grab our total there. Let me go ahead and grab that so I don't double up the values. And I'm going to close the parenthesis. And when I hit enter, it's going to find me the sum. So that's 2,000, makes sense. There's 4 rows of 500. In the average, there's also another function that I can find. And once I type in AV, I can go down and find average and click tab to fill in the rest for me. And of course, I'm just going to highlight week 1 through week 4 to find me the average of 125. And of course, the biggest sale is using a function called max, where I can highlight a chunk of cells, and it's going to find the biggest number within those cells. And of course, min will find the smallest number. Now count's the final one there. And when you use a count, what it's essentially going to do it's going to count the values, like how many values you actually have selected. So there's 16 values, makes sense. There's 4 rows with 4 weeks. 4 by 4 is 16. So pretty simple to practice these functions. Now again, a lot of times people, they actually go to the formulas tab, and you can actually insert functions as well using the insert function dialog box. This does take a little time to fill out for each little function, but if this is your way, where you use the sum function, you might want to take advantage of it. I'm going to hit sum and hit OK, and then I can go ahead and select the cells that I want to add inside this form. So that's another way of doing the same thing, the same functions. I can use the Formulas tab and go to Insert Function. And this one's average, yeah. I can always go ahead and select these cells and hit OK. I can do the same thing for the max. Instead of writing it in the cell with an equal sign, I can hit Insert Function, which adds the equal sign. Find the max function, hit OK. Select the cells I want to use for max. And same thing for min, if need be. Of course, I don't see min in the list, so I have to search for it. There it is. And I can hit OK. And from there, I can highlight the same chunk of cells. Let's do this count just to get all of them in. I'm going to type in count just to hit go. Oh, there it is on the bottom there. And from there, I can highlight these chunk of cells and hit OK. And I'm just going to re-highlight everything, and I'm going to go to the Home tab and add the borders again. So rather simple, whether you're using the Insert function from the Formulas tab or you're just adding the equal sign and typing the function name in and hitting tab. Both ways are there available for you. Great. Go ahead and pause this video, and I do want you to try these other functions that we have besides just sum. Now, before you go, I want to give you a bonus. I'm going to give you a bonus function. I'm going to go to cell E1 here, and I want to type in the date in cell F1. And I want the date to always show me the current date. And I have a function called today. And there nothing goes inside the parentheses, but they need to be there. And what that's going to do is it will add me the date inside of the cell. And tomorrow I'll say whatever date tomorrow is, and so on and so forth. So it's a nice function to go ahead and have the current date from your computer time displayed on the spreadsheet. So now that I've covered that, go ahead and pause the video, practice these simple functions before moving on. Now that we have the basics down, I want to do another formula. I consider this a simple function as well. But I actually added another cell at the top where each salesperson actually has a goal they have to meet. And it looks like everyone met the goal, it's 500. But I want to actually track that using a function. So if they met the goal, I just want to have the letter P for pass. And if they didn't, it's going to say F for fail, which none of them failed. They all passed. We're the dream team here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a function in our function library known as the if function. It simply goes and it checks whether something is either true or it checks whether something is false. If that ends up being true, you can do something. If it ends up being false, you can do something else. This if function here has 3 different arguments you have to fill in. The logical test, the value if true, and the value if false. I can always compare if this cell, F5, is greater than or equal to the cell with my monthly goal. So that's my logical test. That can either be true or it can be false. Now the value if true is what I want Excel to do if it ends up being true. I'm just going to say the letter P, and because P isn't a number, I have to put it in quotes so that it can display the character. And if it ends up being false, I'm going to hit comma. After each one of these, I'm hitting comma. If it ends up being false, I want to hit F, which none of us actually failed. And I'm going to close my parenthesis. So it's rather simple. It just checks whether this cell is greater than or equal to this cell. And if it's true, it's going to say P. If it's false, it's going to say F. But none of us are false. We all are equal to 500 actually. Now I actually can use autofill, that tiny little square, on a formula. Oh, that's weird. Someone failed. Even though it's 500. That's really weird. Let's look into this. Let's see why. So when I did this autofill, so this was the original formula, yeah, with F5 and F2. Autofill actually is going to change the cell address of a formula when you drag it down. So notice how this is F6 now. It's comparing this cell. Oh, in a blank cell. That makes a lot of sense. And this one was just a word. That's why it said fail. It compared to a word. So I guess the value of this word is big. But that's not even comparing what we want it to. It's not comparing the correct cell. So what I'm going to do here is I need to absolutely reference. It's called absolutely reference a certain cell address. I can lock in this cell address so that when I use my autofill, it will remain at F2 and only F5 will go to F6 to F7 to F8. That way I'll compare the correct cells. And in order to do that, I simply add a $sign around the F and a $sign around the 2. When I end up hitting enter here and I redo my autofill, you're going to see it all change to pass. And if I go and I just really quickly, I'm going to browse through these, they're all pointing at F2 because I've absolutely referenced this cell address to lock it in place. So it is kind of interesting to know that autofill works a little different with functions and formulas. They change the cell addresses within them. But in case you need to have them fixed, we can always use absolute referencing. In situations like the goal situation here, where we had one cell that needed to stay put and others needed to go down, we can always absolute reference one or the other. I do want you to try this out, filling out an if. This is as far as the functions I will go. I'll keep that as simple functions, but absolute referencing is definitely something I wanted to cover so we can get the basics of it down. Autofill, absolute referencing. Go ahead and give this a try. Pause the video and come back so we can continue on. Now, something that's worth a mention since we are using the newest version of Office is if you want to check if you're using any features that might not be available in other versions. So far we haven't. We can always go to the File tab and under Info, we can inspect the workbook. I'm seeing more and more something we have to use is check compatibility, just to make sure we're not using any features that aren't supported by earlier versions of Microsoft Excel. I can also have this turned on to check itself every time I save the workbook. So definitely run this if you are working with clients that are outside the org and you're using advanced features. Not many in this course, but maybe something like XLOOKUP or XMatch or the let functions, or we'll talk about in the more expert sessions or intermediate sessions. Those will definitely cause the compatibility checker to run a quick little check and tell you that you might not see those functions on another versions of Excel. Yeah, definitely worth an issue, worth a check, compatibility. And remember, it's always a File tab away under Info for check the issues there. Yeah, go ahead and give that a try before moving on from this video. Check the compatibility issues just to give a muscle memory to find that area. And if you feel like you are going to be sending out quite a bit of workbooks to outside of your org and you're not sure what version people have, make sure to check compatibility when saving this workbook for yourself. All right. Welcome back. Now I actually just got a request from my team. It's more of my data analysis team. They told me that for their reporting needs, they really need a column that just has the last name and the first name separate in 2 separate cells so that when they're tracking things, it can go by first and last name. So they asked me to insert 2 additional columns here where I can track the first name and last name of each of these salespeople. I'm going to insert a row, or I should say a column, I apologize. I'm going to right-click and insert a column, and it's going to show up to the left of whatever column I have selected. So I'm going to insert, I'm going to call this first name. And if I go ahead and select column C and I hit insert, it's going to show up to the left of column C, and I'm going to call that last name. Just to keep things short, I'm just going to put last and first actually. Let me go back there and just remove the name just to keep things short. And I'm just going to start typing in the first names. There's not too many. Starting 2013 and up, when you start typing names like this, it's going to automatically try to help you. It's like, oh, you're splitting the first names up. Super useful. It's actually known as flash fill. Let me go ahead and do the last names too. Super useful. Wonderful. And just to resize everything, I'm going to click on this triangle here and double click to resize that again. And there we go. I got the first and the last name in. Don't worry, in case you ever get a new salesperson, you could always insert a new row as well by right clicking, and it'll show up above the selected row. Above the selected row. But I'm just going to undo that there. I don't really want to do that. All right. So now that I've inserted a column, or maybe a row if I chose to do that, what I want to do is I want to move things around a little bit. I actually want to get this salesperson goal, and I want to move it just a little bit over to about maybe down here so I can keep the metrics all in one spot. Maybe in fact, maybe right over here. Just to keep the metrics in one spot. Yeah, or maybe even on the bottom of this area here. Let me go ahead and grab this. And I'm just going to go over to the border of the cell address, the border. And I'm going to do a left click and hold, and I'm just going to drag it to where I want to locate it. It's actually rather simple to do that. I can put it at the bottom here. I can put it on the side. Let me put it on this side here. Cool. Notice how because I had this absolute reference, it changed to the cell. It referred to the correct cell still. Wonderful. So there's my salesperson goal, and I'm also just going to add a border around that as well, just to keep it pretty there. Salesperson goal. I'm going to make it bold. I can do that to the date too. Here, I'm just going to copy the date this time. I'm going to hold down the control key and then go to the border. When I hold down the control key and I left click and I drag, it makes a copy. I'm just going to add the borders and make it bold as well. So now that we have this here, and I've moved around some cells, and I've inserted some columns, I want you to pause the video and catch up with me. Practice inserting these columns by having them show up to the left-hand side. Practice moving a chunk of cells by just going to the border of it and dragging it. And practice copying a chunk of cells by holding down the control key and then dragging it from the border. When you get a little bit comfortable doing those process or that motion with your mouse and keyboard, and you got it down, go ahead and come back to the video so we can start talking a little bit about styling, making the spreadsheet look presentable for printing, using themes. That's something interesting too. Go ahead and play around with this and come right back. All right, welcome back, and hopefully you had fun playing around, moving things, inserting columns, and watching FlashFill do its thing by inserting the first and last names and having it fill in the rest for you. Now, I do just want to spend some time talking about formatting, because we are looking at a black and white spreadsheet. It's going to end up being printed And something that I take advantage of when formatting things in Word, Excel, is take advantage of these style sets that we have, to where I can go to maybe a title cell, and in my Home tab, I actually have a command group known as styles. And from here, I can add in a style to mimic a title cell. I can also do that for my headings. There's also heading styles. This is using the Office theme. These are the Office styles. There's also different styles we can add. Here, I'm going to get the date and highlight it. I'll make this a check cell. No, that looks too much. I'll do explanatory. There we go. And I'll just make this a little bit bigger so it shows it. Normal, explanatory, and then date. There we go. I want to make it a long date. I just changed the date to a long date. So you can see it fully spelled out. Looks nice. I also want to grab these headers, but remember, there's a lot of headers now. So we're going to take advantage of that keyboard shortcut when we grab these headers. And when I do that, I just want to make this headers more dominant, that they're actually headers, by highlighting them and just going to the top, and I'll make them into nothing too big. Let's do heading 3 there so we can add the line to the bottom. All right, looks good. I'm also going to highlight these salespeople names, right? The salespeople names, and make them a certain color as well. Here, I'm just going to make these ones, here, I'll make them a little gray there. And I'm going to actually grab the data itself, week 1 through week 4. I'm going to make them into input cells because that's actual input that I'm putting in. And of course, I'm going to get this total cell and this was goal met cell. And what I want to do is I'm going to have this as output cells. As output cells, letting me know it's the output for the input. I'm going to grab this chunk with the metrics here, and I'm just going to add a shading to it. Here, I'm going to do a nice yellow to stand out, as well as the monthly goal cell, just to add some color to this there. Cool. I also want to just grab this entire chunk here, and I'm just going to move it, right? I want to move it over to the end here. And I'm going to resize everything to make sure everything fits. There we go. So it didn't take too long, but I've styled up the spreadsheet rather nicely. Let me actually add some borders around this chunk of squares. Let me highlight the chunk. You can always highlight a chunk, the entire chunk, by hitting Control and the letter A. This will grab everything surrounding your cell address. Yeah? Control A. Everything surrounding the cell address. Now that I have this selected, I can always go and add the borders from the Home tab by applying the All Borders option to it. So this way it'll show up in the print as well, which I'd want. Here, I feel like this style is very close to the output style, so I'm going to change it. I'm going to easily highlight it, because you can always change these again. Instead of using a 20% accent here, let's go ahead and change this maybe to a blue. There we go. I do want you to pause the video, and I want you to practice using styles. Adding in any data and model, title, and headings, or themed cell styles to your spreadsheet. Try to use at least one of each. Once you do that, go ahead and come back, because I can show you how we can drastically change these color palettes and the fonts and the effects, if you had any, in the spreadsheet with just a click of a button by toggling the different themes in the workbook. Lovely. Welcome back. Hopefully you have a nice colorful spreadsheet now with a bunch of cell styles put into place. Not to be alarmed though if you're wondering why your favorite color wasn't there or certain colors weren't there. It's simply because of the fact that when you open up a workbook, by default, you are using something known as the Office theme. And in fact, under Page Layout, you can browse the set of themes that you have available. I have a Themes command group. And from there, it's going to tell me I have the Office theme set, but I have these different themes that I can switch to, which will change the font, sometimes the size a little bit, as well as the color sets that we have available within the styles. I'm just browsing to see which one I like the best, honestly. There's so many. You know, I think since this is a restaurant, I'm going to use the organic. That just always makes sense to me. Looks all organic. I'm going to go to the home page, or the home tab, and I just want to show you how my styles have completely changed. So it's rather useful to set cell styles that you want, and then at the very end, pick a theme that you want. Now, don't get me wrong, if you don't like any of the themes, that's also possible. But you're always allowed to change the color of the theme if you don't like it. Maybe you like the font of organic, but you weren't feeling the color. You were feeling some other type of color. Maybe this one here, median. So now what you did is you've changed the color for the theme. And if you want, you can also save this. You can save this as a brand new theme. So that the next time you want to build a spreadsheet, you can keep the same color set with the organic font. I'm going to go ahead and call this custom theme. Call it custom organic theme because that's what it's based off of. And this theme will be available in actually Word as well, where we can go ahead and apply this to our documents, change the font and the color sets that we have available. This will be available for all of our workbooks, the custom theme there that we saved. I do want you to try this out though. I do want you to spend a moment picking the themes, browse through all the ones that you have, see if you like any of them. If you don't like any of them, spend a moment and build your own. Pick the one that you do like, the closest to what you like, and then set the color. Set the font. And if you are planning to add shapes, boxes, images, you might also want to set the effect as well. And then once you have done that, in order to actually save and reuse that without always having to add these 3 toggles, go to save the current theme. That way it will save the color, the font, and the effect with a label that you labeled it, and it will add this new header called custom to your themes area that you'll have available across all of your workbooks, not just this one. Don't forget to come back when you give this a try. See you soon. All right, so I actually got another request from my team. My team is asking me to grab this top half of the data, and if it's possible to actually add it to a separate sheet in the workbook without the notes on the bottom. This would end up being used to maybe just browse the data, display the data, or just kind of filter the data. You just want the sheet with the data, not really the metrics on the bottom. Not a big deal, I already have it. It's just a matter of me adding a separate sheet. Usually when I have more than one sheet, I like to name things. So let me name this first sheet, Fast Food Monthly. And I'm going to go ahead and hit a plus sign here, and I'm just going to call this the data to add the sheet for the data sheet. And I just want to grab this entire chunk, the salesperson, week 1 through week 4, with the totals and the goal met. And we have a shortcut for that. As long as my cell address box is somewhere within that chunk, we can always use Control A like we mentioned earlier. Control and the letter A to highlight all of the data in that surrounding chunk. And of course, I can always go to the Home tab and choose Copy, or I can right-click and copy, or I can always use Control C. There's so many ways to copy. But I will end up seeing these marching ants Once I end up seeing this marching ants here, I want to go ahead and add this by going to the data sheet. Let me zoom in a bit with my zoom slider. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit paste. Great. And I'm just going to resize these as well, just to have the raw data on one sheet. And lovely, there I met that request. Easy peasy. Now keep in mind, if you didn't want this sheet to be present, you can always right click and hide it. And when you want to end up seeing it, you can always right click a sheet and unhide your worksheet to see it and make it available. So now that I've inserted a worksheet, I've hid the worksheet, I unhid the worksheet, and I've moved data to the worksheet, I want you to practice this. Before moving on to something I call grouping a worksheet, I want to go ahead and I want you to practice moving the data to this worksheet here. When you do that, we're going to come back and cover a feature known as grouping, where I can add two sheets together and everything I write down will bleed on to both sheets. So if I copy and paste the title, it'll show up on both sheets. Welcome back, but I do have another requirement from my team. They're asking me to add the word internal in nice large bold red letters in cell A3 on all of the sheets in this workbook. Luckily there's only 2, but I know of a clever way where we can add that internal snippet on both sheets at the same time. I'm going to do this concept known as grouping, where I can get both sheets and put them together by holding down the Control key and then selecting the sheets you want to group. And when I do that, it's going to show like as if they're both activated. There's my data, fast food monthly, and at the top it says group. And also a lot of things are grayed out from the insert tab now, because it's not going to let you insert something to 2 sheets at once. Just type. And if I type in internal, I can go ahead and set it to bold, make it red, make the font size a little bit bigger. Let me do that for myself. Bold, red, font size bigger. And I also just want to make it centered as well. And now that I've done it in a grouped manner, I can right click and ungroup, and I can see that both sheet data and fast food monthly have internal listed with all the formatting, all the sizing the same. I only have to type it once. Grouping is extremely useful for those last minute edits to a workbook where you have to add multiple sheets of data, you have to have the same data point into them, where you have to copy and paste data into multiple sheets at once, add a formula to multiple sheets at once. Very useful tool. I do want you to try this out, the concept of grouping something, grouping a worksheet, before we move on to the next feature, which will be known as freezing panes. I want to make it easier to scroll through the spreadsheet by locking the top rows of my headers so that they stay in place as I scroll. Very convenient when you have a ton of rows in the data set. Give this grouping a try. Hopefully I got you excited for freezing panes when we come back. Hopefully you had a little fun grouping those worksheets. I do hope you went and ungrouped them now that we're done with that. That's important to do, and at the top it doesn't say grouped. Otherwise it's going to be hard to do these next parts. Now what I want to do with this spreadsheet is I want to make it easier to browse through digitally. I want to make it easy so as we scroll, the headers don't get lost. Because as you see, I scroll to a certain point, I can no longer see the header names. It hides them from me. But there is a way to lock those in place, so as I scroll, these first 4 rows will stay into place. In order to do something like this, we essentially have to format the view of our Excel workbook. Now in the View tab, we actually have a command group known as Window. And a very convenient tool that I have placed in there is Freeze Panes. freeze panes will actually, if I have, let's select row 5, will actually freeze everything above the selected row. So if I end up doing this with row 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 will be frozen. Freeze panes. And as I scroll, now the top is always locked into place. I can always go to freeze panes and unfreeze them as well. And there's also an ability to lock in a column as well if I wanted to lock in the salesperson names maybe. I can always select the column and everything to the left of the column will be frozen when I select freeze panes. I'm going to undo that. There also is a situation where sometimes you want to freeze maybe the first 4 rows and also the first column itself. And to that, I'd say you have to select the intersection of the two, of the row and the column where they meet. And if you have your cell address box here, right over here, and you go to freeze panes, it's going to actually lock in this area as well as the top area for me. So 2 areas in once. Let me show you that. And now I can go ahead and scroll left, right, and even up and down. And freeze panes is locked into place. I do want you to try this feature. It's extremely useful when you have large spreadsheets. But if you do plan on ever using the page layout view, very convenient when you're printing out a workbook. It shows you how everything's going to fit onto the page. It's actually going to tell you that freeze panes is not compatible with that feature, which we'll be talking about shortly. And this feature here will unfreeze the panes when I hit OK. And it just shows me that the totals, the goal met, and even the date cell are going to be on a separate sheet. Now, of course, I can always move things around. Like if I wanted the date all to be on one page, I know how to move things. I can grab the border. I can just move it a little closer there. And I'm going to make this column just a little bit bigger. There we go. So everything's still on one page there. I'm going to get the best fit for everything one more time. Looking good. I can leave this on this page, or I can move it somewhere else on the page. I can make the columns a little bit smaller to make things fit. But maybe I don't want this on the page. I don't want to print out this thing. I can only print one page here. Here, let me go back to the normal view now that I fixed the page and I moved the date onto one sheet. Yeah, so page layout view will actually disable freeze panes, and it even leaves this little marker letting you know where the page cut off, giving you an idea for the future if you ever need to make some edits. Extremely useful. I do want you to use freeze panes, and I want you to go to page layout view and then move the date, and then notice how you have the line and freeze panes is no longer on at that point. You can leave it off, that's fine, or you can leave it on, that's up to you. But I'm going to leave it off for the remainder of the time, and I'm going to go ahead, and now that we've covered the ability to freeze panes, print out things, I want to talk a little bit about how we can actually save the work that we've created and maybe reuse it for another month by adding in some new raw data. So I'm going to design this spreadsheet, make it a little prettier, and I want to end up saving it what we call as a template file so that I can always access it when I open up Excel, and I can re-add the data for another month if I need to. So I got a request from my team, and they asked me to make 2 different versions of this workbook. They asked me to make one that actually shows the total and whether or not the goal was met. And they also asked me to build another one without these 2 columns visible. So in order to do that, I'm going to take advantage of a feature known as custom views in my view tab. And I'm going to save a view with all the data. Then I'm going to hide some columns and I'm going to save another view. So that way, if we ever need to toggle between the two views, we have those two views saved, and we don't have to constantly hide and unhide things manually. The very first thing that you want to do when using custom views that's located in the View tab is to always add the original view with all the data showing. So that way you can always revert back to it when you switch to another view. I'm just going to call this original and hit OK. And I've just saved a view. And now I want to hide these two columns by right-clicking and hiding them when they're selected. And I can save another view known as hidden. And when I hit OK, what this is going to do is it's going to save the two views. So if I ever need to go to the original and hit show, I can browse the data. If I ever need to print this out, I can go to the hidden and hit show, and I can print this version out. So this is a very convenient feature. I do want you to try building at least two custom views, one original and one hidden one, before we move forward there. Go ahead and give this a try. Come back, and then we'll go ahead and save this as a template. All right, we've done a lot to this workbook. Now, if you do want to use this every month, something you can do is you can save it as a template. Templates are accessible directly from the File tab under More Templates. Let me actually save this document, or this workbook I should say, as a template by removing all of the sales data that's currently active in there. And I'm going to leave all these formulas in place because once I actually find and add these formulas, these sales, it's going to fill in the formulas for me for next month. But I just want to save the template for right now. Now this date is always going to change to the correct date, so I'm going to leave it. But the big thing with saving templates is changing the way you save the file. When I go to the File tab and I choose to save a copy, this time when you choose to save the workbook, you're going to save it as an Excel template file. It's automatically going to change the location of where this file will be saved. It's going to save it in a folder known as Custom Office Templates. And when you hit save here, you're now going to have access to this template directly from the File tab under your More Templates area. There will be a personal section built with all your personal templates that you can always pin directly to the front. And the next time you restart Excel, you'll actually have access to it directly from the Start screen or the File tab like I have access to it here. And that way, you can always get your monthly sales data quickly inputted, and you can always track the metrics, and all the format, all the layout will stay consistent. All of your custom views will stay consistent. And if you ever need to print out this, we're going to go through spell checking this and the print preview of this coming up next before we conclude Excel 2021 Beginner. Hang in there, we're almost there. Just a few more goodies on printing in the next upcoming videos, and a few more goodies on spell check. We want to make sure all of our words are spelled correctly and how we can add certain words to our dictionary if we need to. Now, something that is worth a mention in Excel, Word, and even PowerPoint is the Review tab. Before it comes time to print out something, I want you to know that you have a proofing command group. This proofing command group will allow you to run a spelling check, and you can go ahead and run it on the entire workbook from the very beginning, and you can either add things to the dictionary if it's a word that you want to not show up as a misspelled word, or you can change them to the correctly spelled version of the word, like my word average there. Once the spell check is complete, you're actually in good shape to print out this document. Now, in the previous videos, we did talk a little bit about how we can use the View tab to do a page layout view, and that's when we learned about custom views to hide those two columns that were showing up. But what if we had a situation where we had to print out those two columns? What options do we have when we print? We're going to talk about that coming up next. Now that we've done a spell check, we've designed the spreadsheet, and we've saved it as a template, it might come time to print a hard copy to see how that looks. Before printing it, we have several settings that we can toggle to make sure we find the best print for this spreadsheet. Hang tight. Before we move on to that, I do want you to practice this though. Practice running a spell check. Remove a letter or two on some of these words and run a spell check from the review tab of your workbook. And then come right back where we're going to talk about printing a worksheet. So now that we have this workbook all finalized and we ran our spell check, I want to point out a print keyboard shortcut, of course, is Control and the letter P. That's going to take you to the print page where we can see a thumbnail of the worksheet that we're going to print and our print settings that we can toggle through. When I go over to Control P, I also have the option of actually clicking on the File tab and hitting Print. Just remember, it's always a keyboard shortcut, Control P, to take us to the same exact area. And something that we always have access to is our print settings, where we can always print the active sheet, our entire workbook if there's multiple sheets we need to print, or just a selection if we want to just highlight maybe a chunk of sales. Just the salesperson, first and last. We can always go to File and Print and change this to just Selection. Now we got a list of just the salespeople. So definitely useful print options here if we browse through them. I'm going to go back to Active Sheet. If you do end up needing to print out these 2 additional columns and you want it all to show up on one page, a great useful tool in the print settings is the fact that we can switch the print to a landscape view. This might add an additional 1 to 2 columns on the spreadsheet. If that's not the case, you can always switch this back and it'll print out on a separate sheet. Or you can always use a larger paper size. There is a catch to this. Your printer has to support that paper size. Same with margins. You can adjust the margins to have your own custom margins, but if you make them too far out, your printer may not support the print to actually go that far out. If all else fails and you need to show everything on one page, you always have scaling options where you can fit all the columns on one page. It will kind of shrink things to make it work. You also have rows on one page. It'll fit all the rows on one page. Sometimes it comes not even legible because there's so many rows that they squished in there. And we also have an option just to shrink all the rows and the columns just to make it work on one page. This is a last resort option to me, the scaling options, but overall I am glad they're there. So now that we've gone through this here, these are our print options that we have. It's usually recommended to first run the spell check like we did in the previous video. And once you're ready with that, you can print out a copy of this worksheet, see how it looks on actual live paper, and maybe post it to that bulletin board like we were talking about at the very beginning of this video. Give yourself a round of applause. You have successfully completed both modules of Excel 2021 Beginner. I hope you take the Excel Intermediate course where we're going to cover a lot about report building and more about text functions. Very interesting stuff in that session as well. Hang tight. Congratulations. You have successfully completed Excel 2021 Beginner. I hope you take the Intermediate and Expert session that we have. In this session, we did cover 2 modules. Module 1 was Excel Essentials, an intro to formulas and functions. And Module 2, we focused on formatting, spreadsheet design, and page setup and printing. I do want to thank you all for sticking through. If I had to put a name on my favorite feature, it would definitely have to be the ability to save templates. That can save an immense amount of time if you use that. So at this point in time, I just want to thank you all. My final thank you until the next video. Take care, everybody. Hello and welcome, everyone. It's Fast Kareem with Learnit, and I have something exciting for you all today. I want to present you Excel 2021, the latest release of the software. Now, in this course, I do want to focus on 2 particular topics. I've broken them up. The first one being lists and tables and charts. We're going to cover some topics focusing on lists, how we can convert them into tables to analyze data, and from there, how we can use and view them visually by using charts. Pretty interesting things we can do with charts, like create templates, add, remove data, and there's also special types of charts like Sparklines that I want to talk about. Once we cover those, I want to dive in and spend some time with Excel reporting tools like pivot tables. Some enhancements that we have with them, how to filter them, how to create them, how to work with pivot charts. And then from there, I want to end off this session with formatting tricks, protection tricks, how to use the review tab to share comments. A lot of interesting stuff we have there. Let's go ahead and begin. Great, so I went ahead and opened up the workbook that's inside the description, and I'm actually on the very first sheet called Creating Tables. And what we're actually looking at here inside the Creating Tables sheet is a list of information. But here's the thing though, this list of information is actually known as a well-defined list. Because there's three things that it has that makes it a well-defined list. The first one, it has headers. And the headers are actually unique compared to each other. There's no two headers that are the same. The second guideline that it has that makes it a well-defined list is the fact that the headers and data are unique. We don't have two headers, or we don't have a header and a data piece that are the same. I don't have a header called Joe or a header called AT. If I did, that'd be considered a piece of data. Now, the third thing that I need in order to consider this a well-defined list is a complete data set. Meaning I can't have any blank rows or columns, even if they're hidden. And the interesting part is I actually have all three of these things. And if you do have all three of these things, you're in prime shape to actually get this list of information and convert it to something known as a table that was invented in 2007. It's nothing new, but it's a great tool to analyze data sets. It gives you automatic formatting, gives you filtering tools, gives you remove a duplicate tool. Now, in order to actually convert this list into a table, we go to our Insert tab to do that. Because one of the command groups that we have access to is known as tables. And there's a table tool within there with a keyboard shortcut known as Control+T to create the table. So if you ever do need to create a table, all you have to worry about is just mainly focusing on having your cell address box within the list. And lucky for me, I already have my cell address box within my list. So I'm in pretty good shape where I can just use the keyboard shortcut, Control and the letter T, to go ahead and create a table. Or of course, if I'm not a fan of keyboard shortcuts, I can just click on table there. But these do save you time, so practice them today. Let me create my table and hit OK. Great. Now before I have you pause this video and create a table yourself, because I want you to catch up with me, I want to discuss some benefits, like what's the point of having this table? Why did we do that? Just for fun? Well, I do enjoy Excel, it is fun for me. But I do want to mention that when you created a table, or when you do create a table, a brand new tab is going to appear in Excel 2021 called the Table Design tab. It's going to hold a set of tools that you can use to analyze that data set. I just want to talk about 3 or 4 tools that you might want to use when working with tables. Now, the very first thing that I like to do when working with a data set that's a table, most of my data sets these days are tables, is I like to go to the Table Design tab and give it a name. I like to name my data sets. It makes reporting for pivot tables, source data, makes it easier to find that, and it also makes it easier to navigate across a workbook. So let me just go into the table name area, and I'm going to call this table, and I'll call it employees ID. And it has to be one word, and the whole point of that for right now is, just so you know, is your table names are actually all tracked inside the name box. And if you ever need to go find that table, The name box will show you the name of it and it'll navigate you to it if you need to. Very useful to have things named in Excel. So one benefit is naming the data set. A small one, but useful. The second benefit is the fact that this now has a new filtering tool. It was released in 2013, but I'm noticing a lot of people aren't really utilizing it. Inside the Table Design tab, we have a Tools command group. And one of the tools that we have available for our tables is called a slicer, which allows us to filter columns of data much more visually. Let me insert a slicer. And I'm going to insert a slicer just for I'll do it for the locations. And hit OK. I'm going to make it smaller. I don't need to make it this big. There we go. And I'll move it to the top here. This essentially is a visual filter that allows me to filter a column of data without using the little drop-down arrow here. I can clear the filter, and if I wanted, I can select multiple items by turning on the multi-select or holding the Control key down as I select my options. So far we have the ability to name the table and to filter the table visually. Let me go back into my table and select the Table Design tab to show you more. Because another useful tool that we have available inside the table is something known as the total row. And if I turn that on inside the table style options, it's actually going to give me a bottom row. And if I click on a cell in the bottom row, there will be a little drop down arrow to which I can run a function and I can aggregate the column above. So I can count there's 37 employees and I can see that the average pay rate here is $11.37. And if I scroll up to the top using my filter, I can browse these situations based off the building that they're located in. I can see that building 2's pay rate's a little lower than the average for these 12 employees. Pretty interesting stuff. Now I do want to show you one more thing with this table before I have you pause the video and practice yourself. I'm going to insert a new row into the table. New rows show up above a selected row. And I'm just simply going to grab this top row and I'm going to copy it and make a duplicate copy of it. So I have two rows that are exactly the same. Your Excel Table Design tab has a tool known as Remove Duplicates. And you give it a click, it actually allows you to browse the data set. And you can search a column or the entire data set. I'm going to do my whole data set and hit OK. And it'll remove any second occurrence of a duplicate and third or fourth. And I'll let you know how many occurrences it removed. 1 duplicate value found. 37 unique values remained. Wonderful. So the Table Design tab does a lot. It allows you to name your data set. It allows you to filter your data set. It allows you to remove duplicates in your data set. It allows you to do calculations in the data set. And of course, if you haven't noticed, you can even choose formatting options, which it automatically comes with one, the blue format. I do recommend to pause this video. In fact, pause it on this screen here so you can see all the things we tried. And give a try for them. Make sure that you're inside of the table when you create it so that you can see this tab and you can utilize these tools. Once you do practice, pause the video and come back though, because there's still a lot more to cover. Hopefully you had a little fun playing around with the table. Now that we've added those things to the table, I do want to flip the page in the workbook to custom sorting. And in order to do that, I'm just going to use my keyboard shortcut Control and Page down on my keyboard. I might have to hold F and N if I'm on a laptop, but that will flip the page in the workbook. And over here in custom sorting, I'm going to zoom in here. I want to show you that this is a list. It's a list, but it's not a well-defined one. If you're wondering why, it's because we have a blank column. Now, I have to build a full name column. And I'm sure in previous versions of Excel, we had a data tab, and we would probably use things like maybe text to columns, concatenate, concat, to manipulate text strings, they call it. But we do have a tool. It's known as flash fill inside of our data tab. And what it essentially does is it looks for patterns on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of a spreadsheet. And it realizes that, oh, you put these two words together. That's the pattern that's done. So what we can do is on this new cell, instead of repeating the same thing and adding these two words together, we can have Excel do it. We can use a tool known as flash fill, which is actually located inside of your data tab, inside of a particular command group known as data tools, where the flash fill tool is located. I do admit though, I like using keyboard shortcuts for flash fill, so I use the Control and the letter E to activate it. Now when I use flash fill, I'm going to hit Control E here. It's going to repeat the pattern going down the entire column. So it's pretty magical how with just one name and a click of a flash fill or Control E, you can actually complete an entire column and now make it a well-defined list. So now that we've done this, I do before we add more material here, because I want to actually sort this data using multi-level sorts. I want to first have you pause the video and practice flash fill. And when we come back, we'll talk about custom sorting. So I'm over here looking at this data set, the pair company employee master list, located on the custom sorting sheet. And I'm noticing it's not really sorted too well. I have my days off all scattered. It's not even alphabetical order. It's not sorted by zones even. Now I'm familiar that most of us know inside the data tab, we have a sort and filter command group. And within there, we actually have a nice large sort option that allows us to do multiple levels of sorting. So I can have one column sorted and then after that sort another column and another column. And this is known as a multiple level sort. Let me set one up. As long as I'm inside the data and I click on sort, I'll be in good shape to see this window. Now the sort window allows me to change the ordering of the data by selecting a sort by. Here I'm going to do the days off, and I want to sort it based off the value inside of the cell. Now if I do this alphabetically from A to Z, it's going to put Friday on top. I want to have Sunday. So when I go back to sort, instead of using A to Z, I'm going to switch this to a custom list. And Excel actually has the built-in days of the week in the order, starting with Sunday on top. Be sure to use the full spelled out version, because this data set has the full spelled out version of the days. And it's just going to sort it based off this order. Let's see that reflective change. Cool, I can see all of my Sunday day offs are in order now. You know, I can go further and I can sort another level. I can have the location sorted. But this will come first. So this is the first priority. Let me go ahead and sort the locations for my second priority now. And I'm just going to add a level. Next, you notice how it says then by. I want to sort it based off, and I said location here, from A to Z, and I'll hit OK. All right, so now it's doing this, and then it's sorting this next, and it seems like it did a pretty good job. I can go further, I can sort the zones afterwards, but remember, this one might not come out 100% perfect, because these two come first. So I'm going to add a third level at the bottom there for my zone. Do it from A to Z, that's fine, and hit OK. So let's take a look at this here. All right, I can see that some of my centrals got cut off because they're in building 3, and I couldn't do anything about that. And last but not least, I'm going to add in another sort, just sort it based off the last names in that list. So I'm just going to go to the bottom and hit Add Level and select last name from A to Z and hit OK. So now I have multiple levels of sorting where I have the days off, and then I have the buildings, then I went to the zones, and last but not least, hit last names. As you can see, there's a letter A at the bottom, but that's simply because they're in building 3, Pacific, and the sort order is set up for this to come forth. Interesting data set. I do want you to pause the video and play around with custom sorting before we move on from this sheet. Don't forget to come back. Have fun. Welcome back. I'm currently on the subtotals sheet in the workbook, and I'm looking at a worksheet that's tracking the pair wine distribution, tracking what representative sold things, what group we sold, and what part we sold, and how much sales, margin, and quantity we have. Now what we can do here is we can use a tool inside of our data tab that allows us to outline things. It's known as subtotal, and it's available inside of our outline command group. It essentially allows us to go down one column, and once it detects a change in the text or the value in the column, it's going to run a function like sum, max, min on another set of columns. Now, important thing in order for subtotal to work is the column that it goes down and tries to find a change in, it has to be sorted. Otherwise, it's not going to find the correct change, and it's going to be broken off into several different subtotals. So I'm going to click into this column here, the type column, because I do want to see how much red I've sold versus white. And in order to do that, I have to actually separate all the red values versus the white values. And lucky for us, inside of our data tab, we have access to the sort and filter command group where we can use an A to Z sort. In our previous video, we covered the multi-level sort, but we don't need that for this situation. Great, now I have all of my reds in order and all of my whites in order. If I want, I can use the subtotaling feature on this list of information. It won't work for any tables that you have, but the subtotal will allow me to check a certain column for any changes that I have. I can use a function known as sum, and then I can select what columns that I want to actually sum, like sales, margin, and quantity. If there were any subtotals in existence, I would replace them because I've already sorted another column. And I do want to see a summary below the data of the grand total, the red, and the white being sold. Let me hit OK to see this reflective change. Wonderful. It looks like it did nothing, but if you look closely, there's actually 3 different levels or 3 different views of this worksheet that we can see now. View number 1 allows me to see the grand total. Don't be too alarmed if you see these pound signs. You simply have to click on the triangle on the left-hand side and do 2 clicks. That'll give you the best fit for all of your columns. And as you can see here, I found the grand total. This is for both red and white for my sales, margin, and quantity. If I click on this second view here, it's actually going to break it down with the white and the red total, with the grand total on the bottom. And the third option here is actually going to be my complete data set, but as I scroll through it with these newly updated scroll bars, you're going to see that they've added in subtotals, hence the name subtotal. And if I go to the very bottom, remember we asked to include a summary below the data? I can see that I have the light and the grand total that showed up. Pretty interesting stuff. I have the 3 levels available in my worksheet now. I do want to remind everybody that how I did this is I went to my data tab and I actually accessed my outline command group and I took advantage of subtotal. Now, an important thing to remember before doing this is to have a column sorted before trying out this example. Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can run a subtotal on this worksheet. You don't have to necessarily do the type column. You can try doing the group or the part column. But the big thing is whatever column you do has to be sorted. Practice that. Don't forget to come back though. See you soon. So this little video, this little snippet is actually for the PC users. Many people use Excel and they use a PC. If you have a Mac, they don't have this available. But it's something that you can live without. Now, if you have a chunk of data that you want to analyze with a visual, create a table, do some conditional formatting, calculate some totals, pretty much many things when you have to analyze data. You can always highlight the data using a keyboard shortcut. This is a good one, Control A. As long as your cell address box is within the data, you can actually highlight the whole surrounding data using that shortcut. Control A. But the important thing is to notice that now we have something called quick analysis that pops up. And this quick analysis tool allows us to do quick little things like conditional formatting that originally was in the Home tab. I can insert charts that was in the Insert tab. I can calculate totals that's in the Formulas tab. I can insert tables. Ooh, I have to cross it, but it's okay. And I have to insert Sparklines as well. So it's taking a lot of things, 3 things from the Insert tab, 1 thing from the Formulas tab, and 1 thing from the Home tab, and it's putting it right at my fingertips. Hence the name Quick Analysis. Now, if I click on this, I can hover over these items just to see a live preview of them. These are known as live previews, and I can adjust the settings for them as I click on them. I can even see live previews for my charts, which we'll talk about in just a second. There's even a recommended charts tool that you can browse through. Or calculate totals. Like this is a very useful one for a lot of people. I can find rows, a sum row, an average row, a count row, a percentage of a grand total, the running total, as well as columns. If I hit this little arrow here, there's whole columns available for me. I can insert a table from here. And I can even create something known as Sparklines, which we're going to cover today in a little bit, which are tiny little charts that fit in a single cell that show trends within the data. So this quick analysis tool is definitely useful, but you do definitely have to train your brain to start using it, as opposed to going up here for the certain set of tools that are available there. It'd be best if you pause the video and just poke around your quick analysis tool, practice the shortcut we just showed you, and then continue on where we're going to talk about charting, how we can create charts, what enhancements are there to the charts, and how we can save the charts as a template so that we can reuse them for other data sets. Very interesting stuff. Don't forget to come back after playing around with the quick analysis tool. If you're on a Mac, just go ahead and skip this part and go on to charting. Welcome back. Let's spend some time talking about charts, because most people are visually based. And instead of looking at numbers, it might help to see visuals, whether it's a pie chart, a bar chart, a line chart, various different styles of charts. Now, as long as you have data selected, like if I hit Control and the letter A and grab this data, I can run up to my Insert tab and there's a command group completely devoted to using charts. Now, an interesting tool they've added in is something called recommended charts. It'll show you a list of all the charts that you might want to use with this data set, as well as a list of all the charts that are available. There really isn't a reason for you not to check this out. Now, the recommended charts tool is going to allow you to browse the recommendations and even read a little description of why you might want to use this chart, what it helps describe, and we can browse through all these other options until we decide what chart we want to use. Now, if we don't find the chart that we want, we can always browse on all charts, and we can take a look at any existing charts that we have. Here, let me just use this top option here in recommended charts and hit OK. Great. Added in a chart there. You know, if you ever do end up getting more data, like here if I add in a new total, I'm going to use quick analysis, something we covered earlier, and find the average. This data doesn't get included in the chart. So if you ever need to add data to a chart, you can simply go back to the chart and select it. Notice how this doesn't include the average column. If I need to, I can always go to the Chart Design tab that shows up when the chart's selected and reselect the data. I'm just going to go ahead and go in here and hit Control and the letter A to grab the average column as well and hit OK. And now I can see the reflective change there where the average has been added. Now, something that I do want to showcase here is one of the newer chart styles. I want to replace that average with a line going across the bars. And lucky for us, I have the ability to get these types of charts that I create and change them to newer charts that Excel has released. One chart that I want to showcase today, I'm going to click on Change Chart Type, is known as the combo chart. The combo chart allows me to select a style of chart for each series of data. I'm going to leave the average as a line and hit OK. So now I have a combination of a bar chart and a line chart in one. What I do want you to practice doing is adding in a chart. Once you add it in, add an average column and try to add in the data by choosing Select Data and then changing the chart type to build a combo chart. Pause the video before we add more to it. Pause the video and practice that. And play the video again when you're done. Great. Hopefully that went smooth. But hopefully you have a combo chart in front of you. Now there are some things that I want to talk about with this chart, because now all of our editing tools are available directly next to the chart. So if we need to remove things like the chart title, we can remove it from here. If we need to move things like the legend to the top, we can move it directly from here. If we need to filter off things, maybe you don't want to see the average anymore, we can apply the filter from here. If you want to change the colors, we have a color option from here. So a lot of different drastic little changes you can make to a chart by selecting the chart elements, the chart styles, or even the filter option. Let me add my average again. Now, the thing about charts is you like to keep them consistent. You hopefully want to make them all look the same, so that way there's not too many charts to process. Something that we have the ability to do is we can save charts that we've created or someone else has created as a template. So that if we have another data set, we don't have to make it green, we don't have to add the data labels and things of that nature. Move the legend to the top, all that will be done for us. If I want, I can right-click the chart itself, and one of the options that are available is the Save As Template. Let me go ahead and click on that. Save As Template. And it's asking me to save the chart in a particular location known as charts. You have to save it in this location so that you can use it. I'm going to go ahead and call it my chart template and hit save. Now in the future, if you ever come across another data set, like the pair record sales, you can always highlight it. Hopefully you're going to use the shortcut Control A. And then from there, inside of your Insert tab, you can always use your templates by going to the Recommended Charts tool, and under All Charts, you have access to your templates. And if I hit OK here, I can go ahead and quickly build a chart that mimics the chart in Charting 1, because I've saved these properties as a template. I do want you to pause the video, and I want you to try creating and formatting your chart a bit, but then saving it as a template. Now the key thing is seeing if you can reuse the template in Charting 2. Now if it ever comes time to where you want to delete a template, you no longer need that template, just always remember that inside of your templates folder, you have an option to manage your templates. This allows you to delete, move, or rename any templates that you have for your charts. Go ahead and pause the video and practice playing around with these recommended charts. Practice saving your templates and editing the chart. Spend some time on it. It's a pretty interesting world. And then come right back so we can talk about another style of chart that fits in a single cell. It's known as a sparkline. Hopefully you had a little fun inserting data charts, messing around with the recommended charts, and editing the chart elements. At the very end, we saved it as a template. But there is a style of chart known as a sparkline that I want to spend some time covering. Let me click on the sparkline sheet that I have in the workbook. And I just want to scroll in, and I'm going to zoom into this worksheet because there's a lot of salespeople. And it's tracking about a few months of data, May through October. Now, if you wanted to see things visually, like what's the top selling month or what's the lowest selling month, are there any negative values? A chart could work, but there'd be so many different bars because there's so many different salespeople. Instead, we can actually highlight data and either use the quick analysis tool to insert a sparkline, or we can run up to the Insert tab and use the command group known as sparkline. Let me run through all three types. Let me build a sparkline that will show a line mimicking the data. And I'm just going to choose the location of the range, the location of it right here. And because I already had the data set highlighted, it found the data range. So that step's done for me. Let me hit OK. This is a sparkline. When you add a sparkline, Excel gives you this brand new tab known as the Sparkline tab to format and edit the sparkline. I have the ability to change the style of the sparkline from here. Let me make it a little darker. And add in something known as marker colors, where I can show my highest values with a certain color. There's a green dot there. And I can also show my lowest values, maybe with a red dot there. Now this is one style. I also have this other style where I'm going to highlight this here. This time I'm going to use quick analysis, sparkline. I'm going to use the column, because I can change the marker color again, and I can change it to show the highest point in green this time, and I can see that October is my highest month. I can change the low point here for red, and I can see that June's the lowest month for this salesperson. And the cool thing is, if any of these values change, the sparkline also changes. Now the final type of sparkline works great with negative values. I had a negative 100 and I had a negative 1000. If I highlight this data set here and I insert a sparkline, there's something known as a win-loss. I'm going to change the color of the sparkline to black as well, but it essentially shows me my negative values below the equator line there. And I can show my highest point in a certain color. I can show my lowest point in a certain color. And my negative points in a certain color. So it shows a lot more than just a line and the columns there. Now the cool thing about Sparklines is that you can use the autofill handle on them. And if you want, these act as background images that change. So if you change a value, the sparkline changes with it. You can also type in these cells. I don't recommend it. You can type in the cell, but it just acts as a background image at that point. Kind of hard to see the sparkline and even read the text. Now before moving on from this, I do consider this a style chart. I can go ahead and drag down and do the rest of them there. I do want you to practice adding in your very own sparkline and then using the sparkline tab that shows up when you're on top of it to format it the way you would like to. I want you to practice at least a line, a column, and a win-loss, one of each. And I just want to see the lowest point and the highest point and maybe a negative point for my win-loss values. Once you do feel confident enough and comfortable enough using Sparklines, go ahead and come back to this video. Because I do want to start covering something known as reports, known as pivot tables, where we have large amounts of data that we can summarize into these reports that track and find metrics for us. A lot of fancy tools there. See you soon. Have fun practicing Sparklines. All right. I do want to spend some time talking about Excel pivot tables. Because there's certain times where you're browsing data. This is a small data set. I also have large data sets where it's about 26 different columns. In fact, this data set here is tracking the order details for December of 2014. Tracking in when the order came in using a date field. It's using a date field. It's tracking in salespeople, how many salespeople we have, what region they're from, when the item shipped. And we're even tracking the metrics of what item we sold, what category that comes from, and what's the unit price, how much quantity, and what revenue each salesperson brought in. The payment type, a lot of values that we can work off of here. Now, if someone were to ask you, hey, who's the top seller for December? How would you answer that? I mean, you can sit there and filter this left and right. Or, I mean, filtering it does work if you think about it, right? Filtering it does work. I can filter based off salesperson, one by one. I can do that. But if there's too many salespeople, this kind of becomes an impossible task. Then I can highlight the revenue. And I can see on the bottom in the status bar, I can see the sum of the revenue and the average of the revenue. That would take forever. There's 8 different salespeople. Let me clear that filter there. A lot of manual motions that way. However, though, if I create a table, we learned about that in the very beginning. If I put my cell address box in here and I hit Control T and I give this data set a name, I'm going to hit Control T and hit OK. Now remember, we do that so that we can get access to the Table Design tab. I'm going to give my table a name. It's just a good practice. I'm going to call it Table Data December 14. And essentially, this tool, Table, allows us to create something known as a pivot table, which can help us summarize this data set. Summarize with pivot table. I want to do that. I want to summarize this with the pivot table. Let me click on Summarize with Pivot Table. And because I've named the data set, I don't have to worry about highlighting everything. It's a table. It just found the entire data set as long as my cell address box is within the data when I click on Summarize with Pivot Table. It's recommended for us to build our pivot tables on new worksheets as opposed to existing worksheets or having a pivot table touch each other. They might break, or if it touches the source data, it'll get a circular reference. I'm going to build it on a new worksheet. It will show up to the left-hand side of the source data worksheet that we're on, and when I hit OK here, we'll see it. I'm going to give it a name though. I'm going to call it PT for Pivot Table 1. Pivot Table 1. I'm going to zoom in here, and I just want to show you a few things with this pivot table before we begin. I do have a green cell address box, and it's inside of my empty pivot table report. Because of that property being inside of the empty report, Excel has given me access to 3 different things. The first one being a Pivot Table Analyze tab, helping me analyze my report, design certain fields within it. The second being the Design tab, choosing how I want the layout to be, whether or not I want a grand total or subtotal being displayed. And the third area, of course, for my pivot table report is to build the report. I have something known as a pivot table field list, where I have all of the columns of my data, and I have 4 different boxes to drag and drop these columns into. Depending on what box I drop these columns into, it's going to build a different area of my report. Now, before I do build this pivot table and talk about the new enhancements to it, and I build a top seller pivot table, I just want you to pause the video and create a table using the data sheet. Give it a name like I did. And come to this stage where you have an empty pivot table on a new worksheet. So that way as I build it, you can go ahead and follow along and you're not too far behind. Pause the video now. And hopefully you're back. Hopefully you're back after that pause and you are caught up with me. Let me go ahead and continue now and build the top seller pivot table. I'm going to do that by going over to my pivot table field list. Now, if this is not there, it's simply because you moved your cell address box. So you have to go back into it to see it. But they did add a new toolbox that we have available. This toolbox allows us to format our fields and have them in alphabetical order. So I can change this and have it in A to Z order. Extremely useful when I have 26 different columns of data. In addition to that, now that I can see address on top and the zip code on the bottom, I can also rearrange this field list. I can get this top box and these 4 boxes, and I can rearrange them. And I actually prefer that setting. I like to have them side by side to where I see all of my fields and my 4 boxes side by side here. Now this allows me to see more columns at a time as opposed to this one because the box is super small here. This is called side by side and this is known as stacked. Let me change it. I'm going to change it to side by side. All personal preference, you don't have to do these things. But now it's coming time to where I can build my report where I can track the salesperson. And I have an option to build a salesperson row. I can go down the rows with my salespeople. Or I can build columns with my salespeople. Let me show you. I can drag and drop it into columns. And now every salesperson in my data sheet gets their own column in the report. Or I can drag and drop it into rows. And now every salesperson gets a unique row in my report. This looks much more compact. I'm going to go with this one here. I'm also wanting to track the revenue here, so I'm going to drag and drop the revenue into the values box. Now it's summed the revenue for me. Now something we like to do with pivot tables is filter them. And if you needed to filter by salesperson, for many years we had this little drop down arrow that shows up in the rows box where you can filter based off the items within that field. Now, if you want, though, inside of the Pivot Table Analyze tab, the tab that's only there when you're inside the report, you have a special command group known as filter. One of the tools that we have available is to insert a slicer there. And I'm going to insert a slicer for the salesperson and hit OK. We've seen this before with our tables, but now I have a visual filter for my report here instead of using this drop down. Very useful. Let me clear this here. So I have the ability to use a slicer. And in addition to that, if you have any fields that are formatted as a date, like I have two, I have ship date and order date. There's a special type of slicer that's actually known as a timeline. And if I go to my Pivot Table Analyze tab and I use Insert Timeline, I have to make sure that the data source actually has a date column. Mine does, so I'm in good shape. I'm going to go ahead and I want to add in a timeline for my order dates that I can filter with. So if I need to, I can go ahead and filter this report based off the month December, and then I can go into the days itself and I can track the days. I can see who sold what on what days. I can see everyone's had a few sales every other day of the month of December there. That's a large sale there. I'm going to clear this filter. So, working with timelines, slicers, and reports are pretty common practices. Now, so far, I've added two things. I've added in a report and a filter mechanism, essentially. The third thing I'm going to do for this report, for having you catch up with these items, is I'm going to go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab. That's only there if you're inside the report. And I want to point out there is an ability to use a special tool known as Pivot Chart, which is a visual of a report. Let me build a pivot chart for my report. And I'm going to use a bar chart here and hit OK. Great. So what I want you to do here, before I add more items to this pivot table, is I just want you to spend some time adding in a pivot table that tracks the top seller. And then to make your life easier for filtering, add in a slicer for the salesperson. If you want to filter by the dates, go and add in an order date timeline. And then at the very end, go to your tools for your report and add in a chart, more specifically a pivot chart. All these things are connected now. If I filter my pivot chart, if I go for a certain date, I can see everything constantly changing. Now I do want to talk about editing, formatting, sorting, something known as drilling down a pivot table. But I do want you to pause the video and catch up a bit before we move on. So go ahead and make sure that you have these three things: the pivot table report, a timeline and a slicer, and a pivot chart before moving forward. It's up to you if you want to change your field list and sort it from A to Z. I'd recommend it, but if you're already used to the original layout, there's no need to. Hopefully you're having fun building those reports. Let me go ahead and clear this filter here and this filter here to go back to my original report, because we're still not done. There are some formatting tricks that we can do with this report. Like one thing that I usually do is I have my report sorted based off revenue, so I can see my top seller on top and my bottom seller on the bottom. I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose sort directly from the sum of revenue column, so that in case I add any new values to it, those will also come out sorted. Notice how my chart also came out sorted as well this time. But they are kind of backwards, if you notice. Like I have Jan on top and Nancy on top. I can actually select the data series of the chart The bars themselves are referred to as the data series, and I can format them. One of the options for them is to make the bars nice and large. I'm going to make them into like 32% there. There we go. And I can also go ahead and select the names next to the bars, and I can format that as well by right-clicking and choosing Format Axis. This allows me to go ahead and reverse the categories of my chart. So things are looking good with the chart now, and I also like hiding these filters, right? The field buttons, we don't need them anymore because I have a timeline and a slicer, so I can right-click and hide all the field buttons on the chart, making my chart nice and large. Nor do I need a legend. I can hit delete there, and I can also get rid of this axis by hitting delete on my keyboard, and instead I can add in something known as data labels. Now I'm sure we're getting bothered by this 17 being cut off, so I'm just going to click inside of the plot area of my chart and adjust the size of it. Great. So I formatted my pivot table report, which led to me formatting my chart quite a bit. In addition to that, I also want to show currency values. I can right click and I can change the number format for these cells. From there, I can change it to currency, and I can knock off these decimal places as well and hit OK. Now this pivot table looks good. It's nice and clean. It's a simple report, very basic one. If I go over to my design tab now, I have the option to choosing my report layout. I can go into outline form, which will label the columns or the rows. Now it says salesperson. Or I can go to the tabular form, which adds little cell boxes around each value. I'm going to go back over to the compact form, which is our original pivot table layout. And I can even adjust my grand totals, turning it off or on, as well as my subtotals if I had any. Now, keep in mind, in this version of the software, we can save the design settings now as a default layout for future pivot tables. So if you don't want grand totals to show up, you can always go to your File tab, and under Options, you have the tool to create a default layout for your pivot tables under Data. I'm going to edit the default layout. And I can essentially go into a pivot table that I have and choose Import. This will change all the settings to that pivot table, and I can hit OK. I'm going to hit Reset to Excel Default and then hit OK. Yeah, so if you ever do make a mistake, you no longer like the one that you have, you're going to hit Reset to Excel Default and hit OK. Cool. Let me go ahead and add my grand totals back there. So I have the ability to format, to sort, add currency values, and I've built my report. I figured out that Nancy's the top seller in December. But in this workbook, I actually have another worksheet. It's called Complete Data. I'm tracking the entire year's worth of data. I want to actually see if the trend continues the whole year. Now there's two choices. You can build a whole new pivot table with complete data. You can hit Control-T, build a table, summarize with the pivot table and build it. I'm going to call this T complete data. Or you can be a little clever and learn that inside the pivot table analyze tab, you have an option to change data sources. And if you change the data source, as long as the columns match, I can type in T complete data and it'll swap it to that data source's name. And as you can see, all the settings that I've done, all the sortings that I've done, all the formatting that I've done has stayed. but now I'm analyzing a larger data set, the whole year's worth of data. And it actually looks like most of these positions did not move at all. Did not move at all, looking good. Now, if you do need to analyze this pivot table a little further and need to figure out what sales Nancy brought in. Now, if you do need to see the sales that Nancy brought in, you can go ahead and double click the pivot table value, and this is known as drilling down the report, which adds in a new sheet for Nancy's sales. I can essentially do this for all of my salespeople. I'm going to do one for Ann here by double clicking and calling this Ann sales. I'll do one more. Andrew, double click. I'll call that Andrew sales. All right. Things are looking pretty good. I do want you to pause the video and practice these formatting techniques, sorting it, adding a number of formats, swapping the data source, and drilling down the report. Several things to practice here. Go ahead and pause the video and come back when you're ready. And when we come back, we do want to focus and shift gears a little bit onto formatting techniques and protection techniques for our workbook. Very interesting topics that we have to cover. Stay tuned. Don't forget to press play again when you practice these formatting and setup techniques for our pivot table. Welcome back. Hopefully you had fun playing around with the pivot tables in the previous exercises. But I am on another worksheet now called data validation. Very common thing that I have to do. Now in this spreadsheet, I'm actually sharing this out with multiple users, and we're required to fill in information. Things like the sales rep credit limit as well as the date. But I have certain criterias, and I want to make sure that all the spelling is consistent and correct. So in order to do that, I'm just going to build some data validation rules for these three columns. I want a drop-down list to show up when they select a cell from sales rep that will display the salespeople names. I also want them to only issue up to 999 credits. And they were only allowed to show the year's worth of data. Nothing from the past and nothing in the future, just this year. So let me start out with the sales rep here by highlighting all of the cells that I want to add data validation to and running up to my data tab because I can find the data validation inside of my data tools. Now inside of my data tab where I can see my data tools, I'll have an option for data validation. If I give that a click, it will let me fill out a little window with 3 different tabs known as Setting, Input Message, and Error Alert. Now for the setting there, you get to change it to choose whether or not you want a whole number, decimals, a list of items. That's a drop down. Let me select a list of items that people can pick from. And now it ends up letting me choose a source where I can actually collapse this window, select the source, and then expand this window. And I'm essentially building a drop-down list that's going to ignore any blank cells within the cell there when I hit OK. Now you're allowed to add in an input message that displays when someone's on top of the cell. Please use drop-down. Just make sure that all the spelling is consistent for our sales rep. I also have an error message. And when you hit OK here, now that I've set up an input message and an error alert, these are going to show up. There's my input message. I can always move it around if it's in the way. And then there's my drop down. So if I end up typing in like Faz, incorrect spelling, please use the drop-down list to select a sales rep name. I'm going to choose Jake there. And now each and every cell has a drop-down. If I want, I can change one of these values, and then it ends up changing the drop-down. So what usually people do is they'll hide, or they'll put it on a separate sheet, so that way people don't change that value. There's still 2 more examples that I want to show you before having you practice this, but you're more than welcome to pause the video and practice sales rep if you want. But let me cover credit limit as well, because I want to have a whole number this time, from 0 to 999. And if I go to my data tab and choose data validation, for the settings here, this time I'm going to choose whole number, and the options will be presented to me. The max and the min. Between that range, I don't have to put an input message or error alert. Those are optional. I can just hit OK. Now if I put the number 1, it works. If I put the number 0, it works. So I put the number 1000 though, it will give me a built-in error message. I can also add in a date range. I can highlight these cells, and there's an option for dates as well. I'm going to put the start date as the beginning of the year. And then the end date, I'm just going to hit today's date, which is Control colon. That'll add in today's date, Control and a colon. Instead of typing it, it'll save you time. So I can't put anything past this year, and I can't put anything in the future. That 11.5 works. Data validation is useful. A very common practice is that people hide the column, and then they'll either protect the worksheet, which we're going to cover today, or they'll add a separate sheet and they'll choose the values from there, just so people don't mess around and change the values like I did. Before moving on from this, if you haven't already practiced this, I do want you to pause the video and try doing a couple data validations where you set the criterias, you set the rules, you set the input message. Once you're ready with this, let's come back, because I do want to cover something known as conditional formatting, where we can highlight cells based off certain conditions or rules or criterias that we've set, or add icons, color scales, data bars, a lot of interesting things with conditional formatting. See you soon. Practice this data validation first though. Another really cool formatting trick that we have available inside the Home tab of Excel is conditional formatting, where we can select a column. I'm going to hit Control Spacebar when I'm inside of a column to select the column. As long as I'm inside the column, it'll select the entire column for me. And I am inside the column, so I'm in good shape. Let me hit Control Spacebar here. Conditional formatting allows you to highlight cells or add icons or color scales. We're going to run through a couple, but the basic ones allow you to just simply select a column and set a condition, a rule that highlights things. I'm going to do listing price. It's just going to list and highlight listing prices that I'm looking for between a range that I'm okay with. Maybe we'll do 100,000 to about 250,000. And if these listing prices show up, I want it to be a green fill and hit OK. That's a basic conditional format. There are other ones where you can add color scales. Let me hit Control Spacebar on square feet, where I can go to my Home tab and choose color scales. And I can essentially set a rubric where it finds the maximum, the minimum, in the middle, and it sets a red, green, and yellow tone, a gradient tone for those colors. The lower it gets, the more closer to red it gets. The higher it gets, the more closer to green it gets. This is one of those conditional formats, though, that you can go and customize. You can leave it as this. This is just using the minimum, maximum in the middle. But under conditional formatting, if this is selected, you have an option to manage the rule. Managing the rule will allow you to edit the rule. And if you edit the rule, you can actually change the rubric that it uses. I want to use a number for my midpoint, my minimum, and my maximum. So it's going to start turning red when it sees 1,200. It's going to start turning yellow when it sees about 1,500. And it's going to start seeing green when it sees about 1,750. Oh, not 2,750, 1,750. Let's fix that. And when I hit OK, you're going to see a drastic change to this color scale now. If I end up changing one of these values, it will also change based off the color scale requirement that I've set. I also can do icon sets, where I can set my bedrooms. I'm going to select the letter there. And I can choose these icon sets that I assign, like maybe these boxes. But they're not going to always line up perfectly, like the 4 lined up 4, but the 3 lined up with the 2 boxes. This is another example where you select the column, and you can actually manage the rule from here. This time you're going to edit the rule, but you're going to assign the icons to the correct value. Now it's important to start from the right-hand side and change this to number first, otherwise everything will reset itself as you do this. So now I'm just going to set the values 4, 3, 2, and 1. Again, it's important to set this part first, because if you don't and you switch it, it's going to reset the value again. And now I have my icon set here and hit OK. I can do the same thing for bathrooms. I can select it, add an icon set. Here I'm going to use the 4 color ratings. And this one looks like it comes out correct because there's only 4 values. Now the cool thing about conditional formats that I want you to know is if you highlight the top row of a list, you can always go to your data tab and turn on the filter tool. And a lot of people don't notice that you're allowed to sort and filter based off colors, including the ones in conditional format. So I'm going to filter for maybe all of my 4 bedrooms here. I'm going to filter for the 4 bedrooms with the icon and filter with the 3 bathrooms. And I want to have the square footage within the green. So now I've narrowed down my searches quite a bit. These are all the houses within my listing price. These are all the green square footages with 4 bedroom and 3 bathrooms. So these drop downs are a little bit more better than slicers if you think about it, because we don't have sorting by color and sorting by icons, filtering by color within a slicer. It's only available in these drop downs. I do want you to practice this. I want you to practice this before moving on. And we're almost there. We're almost there. We just have to talk about linking data, protecting data, and commenting on cells. Very interesting stuff there. But before we do that, practice at least 2 or 3 conditional formats. Try to edit the rule. That's the big thing. Try to edit an icon, a color scale before moving forward. And don't forget to come back where we're going to finish off with linking data, comments, and protection. Now, a very underutilized tool in Microsoft Excel is the ability to use comments. Inside of the Review tab of Microsoft Excel, we have the option to use an entire command group devoted as comments to mark a comment on certain cells. Now, if I want to add a new comment on this cell here, let's link this cell to G7. I can go ahead and send this on its way. And then if this workbook is being shared, users can actually click on Show Comments, and they can see all the comments and what sheet it's accessed and located on, or what cell address it's located on. There can be multiple comments throughout the workbook. I can add another comment here. And users can essentially reply to these comments as well. If you are using a cloud service like OneDrive, you can also mention people's names and share the file directly from them and inside of the file. You don't have to use OneDrive share options from there. Or you can hit the share button up top. But again, a cloud service must be used for that. Now, comments have changed a bit. They used to not look like this. They used to look like what they now call notes. I have an option to add a note, a new note. This is how they used to look. And now we have them as notes that show up. My notes section, previous note, next note, show hide notes, show all notes. So before we do move on from this, it's a very small one, but practice adding in a comment. If you are using OneDrive or SharePoint in an organization, use the @ symbol and see if you can share the file with someone. Also try using in the standard notes, the older version of comments that we used to use. Notice how there is a tool that allows us to get these comments and convert them to the newer comments as well. Convert all notes. And it made it into a new comment there. Very fancy. Go ahead and practice this and come right back so we can talk a little bit about linking data here on this sheet. Welcome back. Hopefully you had fun playing around with the new and improved comment system that we have in Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. But I do want to focus and spend some time. Let me close out this comments area. And I just want to spend some time talking about linking data. How to link one value to another cell, and how to link one value from one sheet to another sheet. It's actually a pretty simple process that requires the use of formulas. If I have to link this cell to this cell here, I have to use a formula to do that by linking the cell address of the cell. So notice how this cell's highlighted, and when I hit enter, it links the value for it. And if the value ever changes, so does the cell that it's linked to. I even have the ability to link from other sheets. Like if I wanted to link from here and I wanted to grab the cell that says pay rate, I can do that, but the formula requires an extra additional piece to it. And that's the sheet name, where after the equal sign, you actually type in link from here, but you put a bang or an exclamation point at the end of it. And then you can actually select the cell address that you want. And when you hit enter, it will link from a previous or another sheet. If I go ahead and change this value, it's also going to change the value that it's linked. So linking data is useful. I don't like linking from one workbook to another workbook. Here's two different workbooks that I have. I can put one to one side and another to another side. I don't like doing this simply because of the fact that it's really hard to maintain. It is possible though. I can link it. It just adds the book name to it. But once you close the file and you share the file or email the file, they won't have access to this book. And it might be really difficult to maintain that linkage, so I don't like to do that anymore. Especially since most organizations are using cloud services. So I do want you to actually pause this video before moving on to our final topic known as protection, and just practice linking.
Practice linking from one sheet, the same sheet, and from another sheet. And when you're done, go ahead and come back where we can cover our final topic known as protection, where we can allow some users to access certain areas and work inside the cells and lock other areas of the cells. Now, protection is a useful tool, but very underutilized. Inside of the Review tab, we have an entire command group known as protect. There are certain times where you get spreadsheets and you only want users to access certain areas of them. Like maybe these two yellow squares we want them to access, and everything else we want locked. Now, protection actually happens in 2 steps. The first step is unlock cells you want users to have access to. And the second step is to protect the worksheet. This basically enables the protect mode. So let's do step 1. Let's unlock the cells that we want to have users access once we protect it. So I'm going to highlight these 2 squares. Now I hope you know this, but you can hold down the control key and highlight another chunk of squares if you need to. And then if you right click, one of the options that we have in Excel is to format these cells and to essentially unlock them. Because by default, every cell inside of Excel is locked. And inside the Format Cells window, we normally just play around with numbers, alignment, font. But on the right-hand side, there is a Protection tab. This Protection tab allows you to unlock these values here, or unlock those cells, so that when it comes time to protect the worksheet, we can choose to have the users be able to select the unlock cells. Now that we've done step 1, I can always go to my Review tab to do step 2 and select Protect Sheet. Or I can right-click Protection, and the option to Protect Sheet is available. Now, from here, I have an option to assign a password, and I can choose Allow all users of this worksheet to, and I'm going to uncheck Lock cells. That way they can only work with everything that's unlocked. They can only work with everything that's unlocked. That's these squares here. And once I hit OK, these settings will be applied. Now notice how my cell address box instantly went to this square here. It's not letting me go anywhere else besides these areas here. So if I type in values even, look, I'm just typing in the number 2. It's not letting me go anywhere besides those yellow squares. Until I actually go back and unlock the worksheet. I can go to the Review tab and hit Unprotect since I'm the one that assigned it. Before moving on from this, I do want you to practice protection by unlocking these 2, highlighting them with that trick, and then right-clicking and using Format Cells, and then trying to protect the sheet at the very end by allowing users to select the unlock cells and nothing else. Don't forget to come back. We do have a conclusion here, but this was the final topic. Welcome back. Now in this session, we did cover list tables essentials as well as charting, and then we dived into reporting such as pivot tables, and we learned how to protect and link our worksheets at the very end with these formatting techniques. I do want to thank you for taking part in this training. This was provided by Learnit. Have a great day. Until next time.
Hello and welcome everyone. It is Fast Kareem here with Learnit. And I want to present you Excel 2021. As we all know, on October 5th, Microsoft released the latest version of their Office products. And a lot of organizations had the opportunity to upgrade if they hadn't already subscribed to Office 365. And with these new iterations of these tools that we get to use, especially with Excel, there's a wide new set of features and functions that they release that simply make our lives easier when using Excel. So in this next hour, an hour and a half or so, we will be covering quite a bit new functionalities, new functions, and some old ones. Talk about the enhancements they have for them. Now, in this course, it's pretty focused on functions, on advanced database functions. We're going to start right off learning about nesting, how to put functions together. And from there, learning about the basic database functions like SUMIF and AVERAGEIF. And right after that, we start getting into some interesting topics where interesting, I mean new. Microsoft released an XLOOKUP. VLOOKUP's still there, but XLOOKUP alleviates a lot of those small little rules and guidelines we have to follow when filling out the VLOOKUP. Things about the lookup value having to be placed a certain area. Things about your range lookup having to be set to true or false depending on your exact match mode. A lot of that's been alleviated for us. There are also some really cool array functions that I just want to spend some time talking about. The unique sort, sort by, and filter functions, where I have a wide variety of examples that we're going to go through using these functions to find a unique list, to sort a list by a particular column of values, or to filter a list. Now, towards the end, we're going to start learning about some other advanced functions, one of them being let. And that essentially allows us to build aliases within functions. We have a value, we can give it a name. And we can reuse that name in other parts of the formula. Now, once we cover functions, I do want to talk about some functionalities and commands that we have, like the Consolidate tool. It's been there for quite a while, but it's a good little refresher that we'll talk about, when we use it and how we can use it. And we will wrap up this session talking about macros, a quick intro to them, how you can turn on the developer tab, how you can record your first macro and run your first macro. Very interesting course here. I do consider these expert topics or advanced topics. But let's start. I'm going to go ahead and open up my exercise file and begin. I'm over here inside of the Excel workbook that's provided with the course, and I'm looking at a particular worksheet right now. I'm looking at a worksheet called If Function. It's the very front of the workbook. So if you've opened the workbook and you notice you're not on the front, make sure you're on the If Function worksheet before you do begin. But let me start by describing what I'm looking at here. Because I'm actually looking at some sales data from February of 2021. And it's tracking these weekly sales from all of our salespeople that we have. And it's calculating all their totals. And it looks like we found some metrics here about the biggest sale, the smallest sale. And whoever designed this sheet is actually using it to figure out whether or not these salespeople have met their quota and have reached the monthly goal of $34,000. Now, depending on whether or not they do reach that goal, these salespeople do get a 5% bonus. And this is all done using the if function, where they're comparing two cells. And depending on if the answer is true, it's going to say one thing in a cell, and depending on if the answer is false, it's going to say something else inside of the cell. Very common function we use in Excel. But on this sheet here, I have one example left that I haven't filled out. And it's asking me to check whether or not the department, this is our department here, has reached and met the qualifications for the $850 bonus per person. Now, there are two qualifications they have to meet. Everybody has to have a total sales of $200,000, and they have to have both. The group as a whole has to have $9,000 or more per week in sales. So an average of $9,000 or more per week in sales. Now, in order to solve this is another if, where we put an equal sign in the cell, and we type in the letter I, and I'm just going to click Tab to fill in the rest of the function. We'll be doing that for most of our functions today. But the if function essentially allows us to do 3 what they call arguments. The logical test, that checks whether something can either be true or false. And if it ends up being true, we have a value if true argument that we can fill out, and a value if false. Now, this logical test will only let you compare one thing. So right now, this department as a whole must have a total sales of at least 200,000, greater than or equal to 200,000. That's filled up my position for the argument. So the if function only allows me to do one logical test. In fact, if I try to do another one, and I end up putting the word pass if it's true, and the word fail if it's false, if I end up doing this, it's going to give me a message saying, says you've entered too many arguments, because the if function expects 3, and here I am giving it 4. To 4 arguments. So I want to introduce a concept known as nesting, where instead of actually putting in the argument that you have, like the logical test argument, we're going to replace that with another function. This function that I want to talk about is called AND. It checks whether all the arguments are true and returns true if all of the arguments that you've put inside of the function are true. So it allows us to do multiple logical tests. It allows us to do multiple of those things that the if function needs. So if I go ahead and compare this cell, the F12 is greater than or equal to 200,000. I can hit comma, and my AND function will allow me to continue and do another logical test. I can close out the AND function parenthesis, and now I've completely filled out a logical test with 2 arguments in it, but in the eyes of Excel, it sees it as 1. I'm going to hit comma here, and now for the value if true, I'm going to put the word pass, and hit comma here. And since these are words, which we call strings, they have to be put in quotes. And I'm going to close the final parenthesis there. So now that I have my 3 arguments, I have my big old logical test that I've nested. They call this nesting. And I have my pass argument. And if anything doesn't pass, it'll give me the fail. So I've satisfied all the requirements, including mine, of having both of those logical tests to determine whether or not they've met the total sales and the average sale requirement. Now, if I were to hit enter here, I'm going to see that it says fail, simply because of the fact that I did not breach my average sales of 9,000. However, though, I do want to mention, I'm going to go into this formula. And inside the formula, I'm going to zoom in here. Instead of using an AND, we can replace it with an OR. And the OR will just check if one argument is true. So if one of these are true, it'll still determine what the pass. That's the OR. But if we switch this back to the AND that we originally had, it actually needs to see both of these true. Otherwise, it's going to give a fail. I do recommend you give this a try. Here, I'll leave the formula on the screen if you want to pause the video here. Try out the formula. See if you can do it without actually copying the formula. See if you can figure it out logically. And if you need a little guidance, come back to the screen and take a poke at it. And once you filled it out, go ahead and press play and we'll talk about some more database functions now that we're getting in the mindset of filling out functions, learning the syntax of how to do that in Excel. Go ahead and have fun. Don't forget to come back. Now, just to get started with this expert session, I want to start talking about some database functions that we've always had. I'm over here looking at these Q1 expenses for, yet again, the parent company, where we're tracking all the divisions and all the categories and how much our total expenses were. Now, I want to use this sheet to figure out and look up my total expenses for all of the software that I've been purchasing. Let's start out with that. So I actually want to sum up the total expense every time I see the word software, going down this entire table or list of information. Now, I want to sum this up if it's in the category software. So let me use a very known function. I'm going to put an equal sign in here. Anytime we use a function, we have to use an equal sign, but I'm going to use a sum if. This is actually going to add cells specified by a criteria or a condition that I choose. Lucky for us, there's only 3 arguments that I have to fill out: a range, a criteria, and an optional argument. It's in brackets, it means optional, a sum range, the values you want added. Now, I do admit it's only optional when the range itself are numerical values, but in my case, it's not. So I get to essentially give Excel a range of options that I can search through. So I wanted to search through my entire category column. And I'm going to do that using keyboard shortcuts. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control, Shift, and a down arrow to select the entire column for myself really easily. You never know how large these things are. Great, so I end up getting the range. That's the list of all of my possible options. And then I hit comma to move over the syntax to search for criteria. That's what I want next. And when I end up clicking on the cell that holds the criteria I want, I-14, it selects that as the criteria. Now it ends up specifying what column or what values do you want me to sum once I find this value, the criteria value, category software. And in our case, we want to do the total expenses. Now keep in mind, practice your shortcuts here. Control, Shift, and a down arrow. That will go ahead and grab the entire column, or it will grow until it meets a blank. Nice. So it looks like we do have all 3 of our arguments filled out, where we have a range, a list of all possible options. We have a criteria. It's kind of covered now, but the word software is in there. And then we have something we want to sum up. So there's quite a bit going on here. 3 things going on here. And if I were to hit enter, it's going to go ahead and show me that I've spent about 17 grand on software in Q1. Now, of course, I'm a big fan of these keyboard shortcuts. If you wanted to add the $sign there, you can do that by hitting Control Shift and the number 4. It'll change the data type of the cell to currency or accounting. So if I go over to my Home tab, you'll see that. It's now at currency. You know, before you practice this, I want you to see how similar these database functions are, because in this next example here below it, I actually want to find the average cost for rent. So I want to find the average of the total expenses if it's in the category rent. So there's another formula that's very similar in nature.
known as average if. I'm going to hit tab here, and the average if essentially returns, well, it asks for three things, same three things that we asked for last time, but it returns the average of the expense. So this time my range is going to be the category again, Control Shift down, comma, and of course my criteria this time, it's going to be I-20. You're going to have a hard time clicking on that cell. It's covered, but I can still type the word I-20 and it'll get picked up. And I can go ahead and hit comma here and I can select the total expenses. I'm going to close this parenthesis here. This time I'm going to hit Control Enter so that it puts the value into the cell without leaving the cell. The green cell address box doesn't move down when you hit Control Enter. Now I can hit Control Shift 4 to quickly add the currency format to that value. Doing good, doing good. I still have one more to show you. And that's this top example, or I'm saving for last because I want to look up the expenses for my category software if it's in the East division. So I essentially want to return this one single value. In this cell here, but we will just pretend that we didn't see it right there. We'll pretend that it was hidden. Another example of using the SUMIF is using SUMIFs with an S at the end. This allows you to do a set of conditions or criterias. It's kind of backwards now. It's going to ask for the total expenses first. I'm going to hit Control Shift down. And when we hit comma to move over to the next argument, that's where it starts asking for the first range, the first list of options, and the criteria you're looking for. So I'm going to pick the first range as division, Control Shift down the entire column. And when I hit comma, I can select the criteria to be East, I-8. And now when I hit comma here, I have a range number 2 that I can fill out with a criteria number 2 afterwards, which will be for my categories. And I believe that is J8, since it's covered by a virtual wall. I'm going to have to type it in, J8. If I were to go ahead and hit enter here, I guess I already left the currency format for this one. Notice how enter moved down a cell this time. If I would have hit control enter, it would have stayed on the same cell. But now I got that one value spitting out as my total expense for software in the East division. So these are database functions, and up next we're going to learn about the XLOOKUP database function. But I do want you to pause the video and give this a try. I want you to try filling out these 3 database functions. If you're wondering what the names of these are, the first one was SUMIF, average if, and the final one was SUMIFs. Go ahead and give this a try and don't forget to come back. We'll talk about the XLOOKUP function. So I'm over here on a worksheet that I've labeled as XLOOKUP. And I'm going to zoom out just a bit because it's a master list of employee information that is listed on this sheet, and on the top is a lookup. Now I've already done one single lookup where I've actually used an employee's ID number to retrieve their last name, Smith. Now in order to do this, I used a VLOOKUP, where with the VLOOKUP I used a lookup value, the employee ID, and I used a table array to search through, and I returned the second column of the table array with an exact match. That's a VLOOKUP. There's a lot of little rules that we have to remember. But it's been around for quite some time, where I can actually use a lookup value. The thing about the lookup value is it has to be in the very first column of the data. Otherwise, the VLOOKUP doesn't work. So now that I have the lookup value, let me highlight the data, known as a table array. Control Shift to the right and Control Shift down. Now it's going to ask for what column I actually want returned. And in our case, well, in my case, I want to return the last name. That's column number 2 based off the highlight that we have. So if we can't add any more columns or rows now, because as soon as I add in a new column, it's going to move all my column index numbers. And then I have to actually add in false, otherwise it defaults to true, and it'll find an approximate match. So that's a VLOOKUP. It works, but there's a lot of rules to it. So instead, what they released, I'm going to delete this now, is an XLOOKUP function for all Office 365 subscribers, and now Office 2021 subscribers as well. And I believe Office 2019 also has this one. So if I do an equal and I type in XL, I'll see the XLOOKUP function pop up from my database of functions that I have. And when I click on it, it's actually going to show me the arguments that I need to fill out. There are 6 of them. But the last 3 are optional parameters that we don't need to fill out every time. Now the very first argument is very similar to the VLOOKUP, where it looks for a lookup value. But this time it doesn't matter if the lookup value is located in the middle of the table, in the first column of the table, at the end of the table. It just does not matter. There's no rule or guideline for that. But it will ask you, for once you do choose a lookup value, to actually highlight the column it can use to search through to find that lookup value. So I'm going to actually highlight this first column. Control Shift down. So I've given it a lookup value, and I've also given it a column to look through to find the lookup value. So it will find this value in the first position of the column. That's what's going to happen. It's going to find it inside of A10. The first position is A10. Now, when you hit comma, it's going to ask for a return array. What column do you want me to return with the matching row value? So if it found row number 1, what column of row 1 do you want me to return? Do you want me to return the last name, the first name, department, so on and so forth? But in my case, I wanted last name. And if I go ahead and close the parenthesis right here, I've already filled out all 3 of the required arguments. This will do exactly what my VLOOKUP did, and it'll return an exact match of Smith. I know, it gets exciting. I'm sure we all appreciate this much more than the VLOOKUP. But let's do another example here. Because what if we have an employee ID that doesn't exist? This NA. That means not available. So if I do a XLOOKUP here, and I use this as a lookup value, it will never find it in this list. And it will never return a first name, because it will never find one. But there is an argument that's optional called if not found that I can write, not in the list. It will return that phrase if it doesn't find a match. I also can do a different match mode. By default, it'll do an exact match, but there are exact match or the next smaller item with the -1. Or you can put a 1 for an exact match or the next larger item compared to the lookup value. And you can also do a number 2 for a wildcard character match, where you put a star or a question mark or a tilde for a certain amount of characters that you're searching for that you don't really know what the characters are. You'll see more about wildcards in my Excel 2021 XLOOKUP video as well, where we'll compare XLOOKUP and VLOOKUP together. For this one, I'm going to put exact match, the default. And if I ever needed to, I can have the search start from the top or the bottom of the list, or even do a binary search. By default, it's a first to last there. I'm going to go ahead and close out this parenthesis. And that's actually an XLOOKUP with all 6 of the arguments filled out. We'll do one more for good keeping here. The department XLOOKUP. But this time, before I do it, I'm going to change it back to the employee ID 1054. Now my lookup value, of course, is my employee ID. It doesn't matter what I use for the lookup value, as long as it's a unique value. And now I have to specify where it can find it from. Control-Shift-Down. I'm going to hit comma here, and now of course my return array is my department column, which will return the corresponding row value number 1, which is AT. And I'll just close the parenthesis here now that we've covered the other 3 optional arguments. And I'll hit enter and get AT. I do want you to pause this video. Here, I'll go over to my Formulas tab and turn on Show Formulas. And I want you to practice filling out the XLOOKUP. And I also want you to see if you can find me a pay rate using XLOOKUP as well. Don't forget to come back though once you practice this. We still have a lot more new things to cover. Alright, if you've just opened up this workbook and you've jumped around in the description of topics, we are in the unique worksheet currently. And in Excel 2021, they've released a new function called unique. And I want to run through a few examples of using unique, with the first one being a very simple one. I actually have a table of information here, tracking all these customers and certain services they received for their automobiles on a certain date. Now I just want to figure out who in this list is a one-time customer, meaning they haven't done more than one service. Maybe I can contact them to do another service, see what's going on with them. Now, in order to do that, I previously would have to do it in multiple steps, but I now have a function known as unique, which actually looks through an array or a range and returns the unique values from it. I'm going to go ahead and pick the customer name column here for the array. And when I hit comma, it's going to ask for the by column argument, return all unique columns from the array, return all unique rows. I'm just going to skip that argument because I want to fill out the exactly once argument. Both of these are optional, but the exactly once, if I set this to true, will return all the items that only showed up once. Exactly once in that list. If I close this out here and hit enter, I'll see that there's 3 people that I can contact to see if they need any or additional services, since they've only been a one-time customer in this list. Now these are known as array functions. In this version of Excel, we no longer have to hit Control-Shift-Enter to control the spill. But in older versions with array functions, they previously called them Control-Shift-Enter functions sometimes, when they would go through an array of values to find out the calculation. Give this a try, pause the video, give this a try, and we'll move on to another example of unique coming up soon. Another example of unique is having a concatenation conjoined into it. I'm going to go to the unique concat sheet, and I want to show you how I can build a list of unique full names using the unique function. I'm first going to select the first names here from my table, and then I'm going to add an ampersand, and inside of quotes, I'm going to add a blank space, and I'm going to find the last name here. If I close this out and I hit enter, it'll give me a unique list of full names. I do want you to pause this video, but when we come back, I do want to show you another example of unique where we're going to compare values. All right, I'm going to jump gears here to another page, still on the unique function, but I'm going to jump to unique compare. I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut for that. I'm just going to hit Control and page down to go to unique compare. And I can actually use the unique function yet again on both the region and the salesperson to give me the unique items from both of the columns. So here I only see 2 salespeople, part of one region. And I'll return the North region salespeople there for me. Pause the video. I do want you to try this one out as well. And I have one more example of unique, which will also use a sort function that we're going to do a deep dive on in just a second. Go ahead and practice this here. Now, one tool that we have available is the ability to nest. We can nest functions. And we can actually build, let me delete this here, I've already added it in. But I can build a sorted list by using the sort function. And with this sort function, I can go ahead and select the unique values from this list. And I can close out the parenthesis here. So now this is a sorted list. If I wanted to change the sort order, of course, I'd have to go to the top and add in. We're going to learn about this in just a second. But the sort order would have to be changed to a -1. Now, if you haven't practiced these 4 formulas yet, I do want you to pause the video and give these a try. And come right back. Don't forget to come back, because we're going to learn a little bit more about that sort function that we just got a sneak peek of in the unique sort example. Welcome back. We've just covered the unique function. We went through 4 different examples of it. Up next is the sort function. And I want to talk about 3, well technically 4, we just covered unique sort. I want to talk about 3 different examples of using sort or sort by to sort a list or a range of values. I'm actually looking at this small list of information where it's tracking regions, sales reps, products, and units. And I want to sort this information based off the units sold. Now I actually can do that by using, I'm going to put a space here, the sort function. I can select the entire list, and then I can use the sort index to choose what column I want to sort by. I'm going to sort it based off units. 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the sort order, here I'll do it in descending order. And I'm going to close out the parenthesis there. Now as you can see, it's taken the list and it's actually sorted it using the units here. Better yet, I'll just control copy this information onto this piece. And now here I have, I'm going to insert. Pretty cool, pretty cool. I do want you to pause the video and give that a try. The formula is right there. This is another one of those array functions that spill into the surrounding cells. There is another one that I want to show you, but this time we're going to use a very similar function, but it's called sort by. Sort by. I'm going to use the control and the page down option to flip the page and go over to sort by.
Great, so it's looking like we have a list. Let me move this completed one a little bit over by adding in some columns. Here we go. And this list isn't sorted in any order or anything, but I do want to sort it by the age column. So I can do that by using a SORTBY function, where I can select the list and I can choose the column I want it sorted by. And the sort order, I'll do it in descending order with a -1 there. You can pause the video now and give this one a try, or you can wait till I show the final example, and you can give all three a try at the very end. There's one more sort by, but what if I wanted to do multiple criterias? This would sort by. I added in a region column, because sort by allows you to do multiple columns here. Let me insert a column and move this away. And this time, I'm going to do a sort by. I'm going to select the entire range, my array there. And the first way I want to sort it is based off the age in descending order. And then after I do that, I'm going to hit comma, and then I have a by array. I'm going to also do it by the region. And I'll do a 1 there, and I'll close it and hit enter. So first goes by age, then it goes by region. So the age will have the priority, of course. Let me go ahead and grab this information here, and I'm going to copy it there with sort by. And I'll just grab this chunk here, and I'll merge and center it. And I'll style it. So we've just gone through 3 different functions, or 3 different examples with 2 different functions. The first one being the sort, and then the sort by. One just with 1 column, and then we use the additional with multiple criteria. I do want you to practice this, all 3 of them. And when you come back, we're going to learn about something known as filtering. And I'm not talking about this little drop-down arrow that we see on some of these columns here. I'm talking about a function that we have called filter, and the multiple variations that we can use it with multiple criterias, and as well as how to conjoin sort and filter together. Very interesting stuff here. Go ahead and practice these sort by and sort functions with multiple criterias and come right back. Another new release that we have, a new function that's been released, is called filter. And here I have a list of sales transactions. I'm going to zoom in a bit. It's tracking the regions, the sales reps, the products, and the units. I can actually use a value from a cell to filter this list and return the corresponding filtered results. This is another one of those array functions where I'm going to use a filter, and I'm going to select the entire array, the entire data set. And I want it to include, I'm going to select the product column, as long as it's equal to the value pair, which is found in G1. And if it ends up being empty, there's no values, just return blank. I'm going to close this and hit enter, and it'll return the 1 pair value. And if I end up getting another value that gets changed to pair, it'll automatically add it to this list as well. It has filtered this results using the entire array, going to the product column, and then searching for the word pair. Pretty interesting.
Pretty interesting. Now, there is another type of example that I'm going to show, very similar in nature to this. But if you do want to pause the video and give this a try, you're more than welcome to. Now, this next example is very similar, but what if we had more than one criteria? Maybe the product and the region is something we're looking for. So here I've actually done a filter, but this filtered list has two things it's filtering for. It's filtering for a region and a product. Let me explain how that's done here by deleting this and running a filter function and including the entire array just like I did last time. This time, though, I have two things to select. I'm going to first do the products. If it's equal to this cell here. And then I'm going to put parentheses just to show association. I'm going to multiply it. They call this multiply, but it's really an operand. It's more of an and. How I see it is an and. I want to check for the regions to be equal to east. And here I'll put that in parentheses too. So this is an and of sort. Ooh. Let me close out that extra parenthesis there. And when I hit enter, it return anything that's from Apple and east. So if I end up changing another one of these to Apple, and I change this over to east, it'll return both. I also have an option, just to let you know, to replace this asterisk with a plus sign. And that's or, as long as it has Apple or east. It'll return that here. So you can see I have a banana product that was sold in the east as well. Very interesting here. Just to recap here. We were learning about the asterisk, which looks like it's multiplying, but it's really looking for an and. That's what it's kind of doing, an and, but we just use the symbol. And instead of or, we use a plus sign. Both will work and both reproduce a filtered value, a filtered list of the results you were looking for. So in this small little brief video, we've covered 3 examples, or 2 so far. We're going to go on to the third. We learned about just the filter function. And then we learn about filtering with multiple criterias. Now coming up next, I want to talk about sorting and filtering. So here on this sheet, I already have the example filled out, but I'll just move it over a little bit. Just move it over a little bit. And if I want, I can actually sort and filter a list at once by nesting things. Maybe I want to filter to show everything that has a unit sold over 5,000. And I want to sort it in ascending order. So I want a sort, a filtered list. Or I want to filter this list and include anything that's greater than this cell here. And then I'm going to hit for my sort. After my sort index, the column I want sorted, I'm going to do number 4. I want it to be sorted based off the units. My sort order, let's do it in descending order actually. Close out the parenthesis, hit enter here. So here I've sorted the list based off units, and it's only showing with 5,000 or more. Very interesting formula. It's a nesting. Again, we started out with nesting because we end off almost every example with a nested version of it. Go ahead and practice this, and when you feel comfortable, come back where we're going to talk about the let function. I have one more function that I want to cover here before we move on to consolidate and macros, and that's the let function, which is pretty interesting because it lets you name things. Assign calculation results to names. Useful for storing intermediate calculations. So I can essentially let something be a variable name. I can call x the number 5. And then for the third argument, I can use a calculation where I use that value, x, which holds the number 5, and it will sum it. Let me close the parenthesis, and it'll make 6. So what if I wanted to filter this list to show me all of Fred's sales? And if it sees a blank, it's just going to add a dash. So I want to just filter the results for Fred. Now, without let, it's going to look something like this. I have to do an if, and I have to look if it's blank, and I have to filter this list. And I'm going to filter this entire table, and I want it to include the rep name that's equal to Fred. And I'm going to close out both parentheses here. And I'm going to hit comma so that if that ends up being true, if there's a blank, I want to add the dash. And I'm going to hit comma. And if it ends up being false, here I'm going to do a very similar function, another filter function. And for this filter, it's almost copying the same formula down again. It's the table. I'm looking for the rep. If it's equal to Fred, and I'm going to close out both parentheses there. So when I hit enter here, it will return all of Fred's values, including the one that didn't have an actual sale or a product that he sold. Now I can do the same thing with let, and this makes it much more human readable and easier to fill out essentially. Here I can let, I'm going to build a name called filter criteria. The filter criteria, the value of it's going to be Fred. I can hit comma and I can do another name or a calculation. I'm going to do another name. I'm going to call it filtered range. And when I hit comma, now I can do a value. I'm going to do a filter for the value. And I'm going to filter this entire list. But I'm going to filter it to include, I'm going to select the reps, and this is where I get to use the save name. So I'm going to do this for the filtered criteria. Notice how it pops up filtered criteria for me. I can close the parenthesis. I can hit comma. I can do another if. And if this is blank, if there's another is blank, for my filtered range, right? I have a filtered range that I've saved now. I can close that parenthesis. So if there's a blank in my filtered range, I'm going to hit comma. I want to replace it with a dash. If not, just return the filtered range. I'm going to close out this parenthesis here, and I'm going to close out this parenthesis here, and it's looking like I have either an extra parenthesis. It is. There we go. Cool. I just had an extra parenthesis floating around there. Now this returns the same result, but I'm actually using the filter range value and the filter criteria value inside of the formula. If I hit enter, it returns the same thing. So let essentially allows you to give names to values in formulas. And then you can reuse that over in the formulas calculation. You can do more than one. That's what we did. We named 2. Practice this. I'm going to leave the formula on the screen so you to pause the video. And then come back for us to cover Consolidate and macros. Welcome back. Hopefully you had fun playing around with those new functions that we've just covered. But I want to talk about a command that we've had for a while now, but it's a pretty useful tool when summarizing multiple sheets of data. So here I have a Connecticut division where we're tracking a few items: software, training, maintenance, and miscellaneous throughout the quarters. And we also have formulas to figure out the sum of each column. And I've done the same thing for my main division in the same exact structure. And the New Hampshire. What I want to do is I would like to build a summary page that consolidates all 3 of those sheets that I just showed you into one page. Now, this is actually known, you can do it by hand, of course, but this is actually known as consolidation by position. The data in the source areas, these are the source areas, have the same order and they use the same labels. These are the labels. We can use this method of Consolidate to add from a series of worksheets that all are in the same workbook, such as departmental budget worksheets that have been created from the same template. So here, let me build a summary division. I'm going to highlight the labels that I created, and I'm not going to include any blanks, and I'm not going to include any formulas. And inside of my data tab, I actually have a data tool known as Consolidate. And if I were to give a click on Consolidate here, it's going to allow me to choose a function, and I can add different references from different sheets in the workbook, and it will run the function on them. So let me add my first reference, which will be Connecticut. And I'm just going to highlight all the labels, no blanks and no formulas, and I'm going to hit add. And I'm going to do that for all 3 sheets. So I'm going to do that for main, and because I've already highlighted it, it already picked up that, and all I have to do is hit add. And now if I click on New Hampshire, yet again, the highlight is already placed for us. It remembered that fact, and all I have to do is hit add. Now on my summary sheet, if you want the labels to actually show up and not be blank, I recommend to mark use top row labels so it doesn't replace it with blank values, and use left column labels so that it fills it in with the new values that you're replacing it with. If you are concerned about these 3 sheets having updates, you can always link the 3 sheets to the final sheet. And when you link them together, if there's been an update, the update will also show up on the summary. I'm going to link these together here and hit OK. So now my consolidated summary sheet has added 2 different levels of this worksheet where I can expand and collapse the 2 levels. And when I expand to level 2, it will show me the values it used in Connecticut, Maine, and New Hampshire to figure out the $1,500 expense for software we had in quarter 1. And so on and so forth. So it's going to show these values being added. You can always expand and collapse these as you go along. There's my software. Now this is my training, where I made 900. And this is more, I can expand and collapse it. There's my maintenance. Collapse it. There's my miscellaneous. And collapse it. And these formulas just filled themselves out as the numbers came in. Very interesting tool, the summary division. The Consolidate tool we use there inside of the data tab allowed us to get multiple sheets of data. And we essentially consolidated it into one sheet. I just drew out the icon there. practice this before we move on, everybody, to our final topic, which will be macros. Learning a little bit about programming, a VBA, where we're going to do small sets of computer instructions that we add in to the software. And it will just kind of alleviate those repetitive tasks that you have to do. So, I want to end off this expert session talking about something called macros, which is actually by definition a small set of computer instructions. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not going to sit here and learn about programming and coding, although there is a coding aspect to macros. We're going to use something called a macro recorder to record lines of VBA. If you're wondering what VBA is it's a programming language. But we can actually record ourselves doing things in Excel, and it translates to VBA for us. All we have to use is the Developer tab in Excel to record macros. So the first thing I want to show everybody in terms of getting sound with building macros, it's a great avenue to get into, and it will lead to a world of possibilities. But in order to get to that world of possibilities, you must have a special tab in your Excel called Developer. That's a tab that you have to turn on for each copy of Excel that you use. So on this device, if I needed to turn on the Developer tab, if you're noticing you don't have yours, you would simply have to right-click one of these tabs, because the option to customize the ribbon will be presented to you. Now, when I customize the ribbon, you're going to see it takes you to your Excel options with the customized ribbon settings open. And I get to choose this area that allows me to turn on the Developer tab. It shows me all of my tabs, which ones are on, which ones are off. And I get to check mark the Developer tab here to turn on. Once I hit OK, I'll end up having it. Now this Developer tab gives me access to the set of tools that I need to actually record my macro, the code command group, as well as the controls command group. We'll be talking about these in just a moment, but first, pause the video. Make sure you can turn on the Developer tab in your software before we go to record our macro. All right. Good stuff. Now that I have the macro Developer tab turned on, I can record my first macro. Now, in order to record my first macro, let me make that font size a little bit bigger for us. What I want to do is I want to record myself building a header where I get my first and last name, I get the company name, and I get the date. And I put it in the top 3 cells. I want to record myself doing that so in the future I can just run a command to add my header onto the spreadsheets. Let me start out by recording my first macro here. I'm going to hit the record macro button and I'm going to call it my first macro. And I'm going to use Control-Shift-M to run my macro. And I'm going to store the actual code of the macro inside of this workbook. A header. I could store it in another workbook. That way I can use it across multiple workbooks, but this is just an example that I'm running. Just saving it in this workbook and hitting OK. Now for this cell A1, I'm just going to type in my first and last name, Faz Kareem. I'm going to end up putting Learnit for the company name and equal today, open close paren with nothing inside of it for the date. And I'm just going to hit stop recording here. So now that I've recorded this macro, I can run it. I can hit Control-Shift-M and it'll go ahead and run the macro. It doesn't matter where my cell address box is when I run the macro because I didn't use relative referencing. The code itself will always go back to cell A1, A2, and A3 regardless of where I run my macro. Now, of course, I can use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-M to run my macro, but most people forget those shortcuts and they'll have to run to their macro library. And once they see the macro name, they can hit run. And because I've recorded the macro in what they know and call absolute reference mode, I am always going to see it show up in cell A1, A2, and A3. I do have the ability here to do a different style of macro recording, or I can turn on relative referencing. And now when I hit record macro, I'm going to call this one my second macro with a Control-Shift-S for second. This is using relative referencing. And let me show you the difference between the two. So I'm just going to do the same macro, fast Kareem. I'm going to type in Learnit, and I'm going to type in equal today. Open, close paren, and hit enter. And I'm going to stop recording the macro now. Remember, this is relative referenced. Now, because I've relatively referenced it, if I have my cell address box here, it'll be relative to where it was recorded. So if I end up running the macro, the second one, it's going to show up in these three cells. Where if I go to the first one, I'm going to go to the first one and run it. It's going to continue showing up in cell A1, A2, and A3. Now keep in mind that if you would like, you have the ability to use the controls command group and add a form control button. This can allow you to paste and draw a button on the screen to where you can assign one of the two macros you created. Pretty cool, pretty cool. Now be sure before you try this out, there is a special way you have to save this workbook in order to save the macro. Inside the File tab, when you go to Save As, you do have an option to actually save this, not as an Excel workbook, but as an Excel macro-enabled workbook. This will ensure that all of the file types are correct so that the code snippets are actually saved. And if you were to send this to someone, they'll receive the code with it as well, the script with it as well. Cool, so I just saved that copy there too as a .xlsm file type that we have. I do want you to pause the video and practice building these two macros that we've just done. One being the absolute referenced, and then go back and build the relative referenced one. And try to see if you can assign a form control to it. Congratulations. In this course, we did cover quite a list of new functions, mostly array functions, with these two interesting ones, the let function and the XLOOKUP function that we got to see. And at the very end, we got a sneak peek and an introduction to macros, a very large world that we have to explore. Do stick around and stay tuned for our Excel 2021 XLOOKUP and pivot table videos. It's been a pleasure teaching this material and explaining it to everyone that hopped on and watched these e-learnings. I hope the practice reinforced the learning, those small little hands-on snippets where I told you to pause. If not, go back and rewatch the video and practice these things again. I do want to thank you for giving me some of your time. Be sure to check out our other videos and check out our website if you're interested in any other future trainings.